I never imagined my life would turn into a nightmare. One day, I discovered a hidden love note, and everything I believed in shattered. Confronting Whitney, the woman I thought I knew, was like staring into the eyes of a stranger. Consumed by rage, I tracked down her lover, leading to a relentless chase through the city. Our final showdown took place in a desolate warehouse where betrayal and revenge clashed. This is my story of deception, heartbreak, and the ultimate payback. My right hip hurt a lot from the moment I woke up. "Bad weather on the way," Whitney murmured, her half-open eyes tracking me as I limped to the bathroom. I only grunted. Days like this were the worst. Most people looked forward to spring, but not me. Spring meant cold and damp weather, which made my old hip injury hurt almost all the time for 2 months or more. It also brought back scary memories of how I got that injury. After using the toilet, I stared at myself in the mirror while washing my hands. The face looking back at me was still a bit sharp. Okay, maybe not sharp, but at least it wasn't sagging like that of most people my age. My gray eyes looked tired and had lines around them. My short hair had some gray in it, and my chest and skin showed signs of age and gravity. Still, I was only 7 pounds heavier than the day I graduated. My body seemed to be holding up fine except for that damn hip and the memories that often came with the pain. "You okay?" Whitney asked through a yawn, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah," I said, watching her stretch out behind me. On any other day, in any other mood, I would have thought about starting the day with a nice morning chat. There she was, her soft brown hair a mess, her petite body covered only by an old t-shirt and a pair of pajamas. I knew she was full of energy and life. "Your hip?" she asked now, nudging me aside to get her toothbrush and toothpaste. "It's going to rain today," I said. "You were tossing and turning all night," she said, starting to brush her teeth. I grabbed my toothbrush to join her in our morning routine. Once done, Whitney hopped into the shower while I shaved. After rinsing my face with cold water, I went down the hall to wake up Kyle and get him ready for the day. 15 minutes later, I was sitting at the table, sipping coffee and reading the paper while Kyle ate his bowl of cereal. "I got my second-grade assignment," Kyle said with a mouthful of food. "Don't talk with your mouth full," I said, lowering the paper. He finished chewing. "I got my second-grade assignment yesterday and I asked about Miss Palmer," he said. "So, what did they say about Miss Palmer?" I asked. "She's cool," he said. "Kind of old, though." I tried not to smile. A 7-year-old's idea of old was as old as me. He frowned. "Not that old. More like Mom." "I won't tell her you said that," I said. "Why?" he asked. "It's not nice to tell women they're old." "It's not nice to tell anyone they're old, but especially women." "Why?" he asked again. I shrugged. "Just one of those mysteries of life, little man." "What mysteries of life?" Whitney said, buttoning her blouse as she entered the kitchen. She was dressed for work in a white blouse with a gray skirt and jacket. She was ready for another day of helping the people of Lincoln County. "Nothing," I said. "Dad was saying that I shouldn't say people are old even if they are. It's not nice." She chuckled, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Did you call your dad old?" "No," he said, ignoring my shushing gesture. "I said you were old," she laughed. "So you're not mad I said it?" Kyle asked. "I told you so," I said. "Your father's right," she said, sitting with us. "It's not polite." Kyle said nothing to this, preferring to finish his cereal in silence. "He got his second-grade assignment," I said. She raised her eyebrows, sipping her coffee. "Miss Palmer," I said. Whitney nodded. "Sure, Kristen Palmer. She started 4 or 5 years back." "And how is she?" I asked. "Old like you," I joked. "We graduated together," she said. "High school. She got her degree pretty quick but didn't start teaching again until she came back here and got divorced." "Same age?" "Yep." "So, is she any good?" Whitney shrugged. "Dunno. She was real popular back in school. Prom queen, head cheerleader. You know the type. We didn't exactly hang out together. She was always busy with social stuff." "Jealous?" I teased. "Not anymore." "Meaning Tyler Collins?" I nodded. "Lives out on Twin Oaks Road somewhere." She nodded. "Her ex-husband. The first one? The second one was a cop from around here. So no, I'm not jealous. I nodded again. But she's a good teacher, right? Not a clue, Whitney said, looking at her watch. Can you hurry up? I really need to get to the office. Final preparations for that hearing today. What hearing? The library drug case, she said, sounding a bit impatient. Their motion to suppress the evidence. I nodded, putting my coffee mug in the sink and going to take a shower and finish getting ready. Then I'd take over so Whitney could get to work at the state's attorney's office. After that, I'd finish getting Kyle ready, drop him off, and head to Chadwick College for my morning history class. Just another weekday morning at the Patterson house. Driving to Chadwick, something was bothering me. Whitney's moods. She had been more impatient and quiet lately. She always seemed like she was on the verge of saying something, but then staying silent. Something else was bugging her, more than just the usual work stress. I thought about it as I parked and grabbed my briefcase. I checked my watch. I was 20 minutes early, as usual. Old habits are hard to break. It was almost 7:30 when Whitney walked in the door. "Did you guys already eat?" she asked, hanging her coat in the closet before turning to me. "I fed Kyle," I said, marking my place in the big book on the Punic Wars. I set it aside and stood up to greet her. "He's in his room doing homework. I waited for you." She gave a tired smile. "You didn't have to do that. You must be starving." "You too," I said. She shrugged, looking really tired and worn out. "Everything okay?" I asked, pulling her into my arms for a hug. "You seem really distant. Something on your mind?" She murmured something into my shoulder, then hugged me tighter. This was the same response I'd been getting for the past month. She wouldn't open up. "Do you want to talk about it over dinner?" I asked. She broke the hug. "It's nothing, babe. Work stuff. Same problems, different day. I guess it's just getting to me." But her face said more. It was like she wanted to talk, but was scared. "Did the hearing go okay today?" Her face changed and she nodded. "Oh, that. Yeah, it's been pushed for another 3 weeks. Nothing new." I narrowed my eyes but didn't react. "Come on, roast chicken and grilled asparagus with lemon dressing is ready." She went to spend a few minutes in Kyle's room while I got our plates ready. 5 minutes later, we sat across from each other at the table in silence. She picked at her food and I barely touched mine. "Is it okay?" I asked after a while. She looked up and tried to smile. "Yeah, Luke, it's really good. I guess I'm just not that hungry." She looked at my plate. "What about you? You okay?" "Just the hip." She nodded, then pushed her plate away. "Let's go get Kyle ready for bed. It's almost his bedtime." "Okay." I agreed, picking up our plates and putting the leftovers into a container before putting it in the refrigerator. When I turned back, I saw Whitney leading Kyle to the bathroom to brush his teeth. My suspicions from the morning were now full-blown worry. Whitney's work hours were long and hard. Her promotions had increased her workload over time. The last 8 months had been tougher since she became the lead felony prosecutor. Back in the bedroom, I changed into my underwear, a t-shirt, and reading glasses. I put on my robe and went to hug and kiss Kyle goodnight. Then I grabbed my book and looked for Whitney. I heard a noise in the garage. "You out here?" I called into the dark garage. She sniffled. "Over here?" I turned on the light. She stood in the corner, her arms tight around herself, her head turned away. "Whit," I said, stepping onto the cool floor. "What's wrong?" She just shook her head, crying. I walked toward her, but she squeezed herself tighter. A cold feeling of dread filled me. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "You're going to hate me," she said, not looking at me. "Why? What's going on?" Her head dropped, and she didn't answer. "What have you done?" I pressed, scared to know but needing to. "Help me," she whispered, her eyes pleading. Sometimes I wonder if I should have given her more time. Maybe she would have figured it out on her own. But I had to know. Whatever was tearing her apart was now tearing me apart. "I'm your husband," I finally said. "I love you and I'm here for you. Whatever it is, you can tell me." She hesitated, then finally spoke. "It's everything. It's you, it's me, it's us. It's work, I'm just not happy." Her words hit like a punch. "Us?" I croaked. "What's wrong with us?" She shook her head. "Not just our marriage, everything. It's all getting so, I don't know, stale. There's no spark, no excitement. Just drudgery." I stayed quiet, trying to understand what she meant for our family. "I don't feel alive anymore, Luke," she pleaded. It's like I'm just going through the motions. I mean, I love you. I love Kyle, but my whole life feels stuck. I wake up, get ready for work, spend a few minutes with you guys before rushing out. At work, I spend 10 to 12 hours trying to deal with people who can't seem to get their act together, trying to lock them up until they learn how to behave. Then I hurry home, squeeze in an hour to relax while getting Kyle in the bath and doing the dishes. Then it's bedtime. The next morning, same routine. I usually do the dishes, the cooking, the bathing, and the homework. I know she cried. That's not the point. You do it all even when I can't help you. But our weekends are spent at home getting stuff ready for the next week. I just want things to be different. Different how? A new job? Go for it. You know I'll support you. She shook her head. Will that really fix everything? My eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying I think we should separate, she said, her tears drying and a firm look settling in. I need time to figure out what I want, what I need. And what about us? What about Kyle? She snorted, angry. Paul doesn't need me to take care of him. He's got you. So you're just leaving him? I'm not leaving him, she snapped. I'm not abandoning him. I'm not running away from my baby. Then what are you doing? I pressed. I'm taking time to get my act together, time to make sure I'm better for him. I stared at her, waiting for her to finish. After a moment, I was left wondering what she wasn't saying. So you're not going to spend this time figuring out if you want to stay married to me, I guessed? You've already given up on us. Whitney's lips tightened. Answer me. I don't know. Is there someone else? She hesitated, then shook her head. Who is he? I said there was no one else, she hissed. I'm not cheating on you. I'm not seeing anyone. But you have your eye on someone, don't you? She turned away, refusing to answer. During this separation, I said, you're going to see if it can work with him. If it does, you'll leave me, right? Or were you just going to leave me anyway? It's not like that, she said. Her voice went flat, emotionless, like she was about to confirm it was exactly like that. And this separation, I said. When does it start? Where are you moving? In with him? I don't know. Which part? Which part don't you know? She turned back, her eyes empty and her voice low and cool. I don't know when it's going to start. I don't know where I'm moving. I doubt I'll move in with him, but it could happen. I just don't know yet. What do you mean you haven't thought that far? You're a lawyer. Thinking and planning is what you do for a living. You pushed me, she said. I didn't want to tell you yet. I corrected her. You didn't want to tell me yet? So what were you going to do? Get everything ready, pack your stuff, give me a goodbye and leave? After almost 10 years? She didn't answer, but her face told me that's what she wanted to do. Fine, I said. Do whatever you want. It's clear where I fit in your plans. And Kyle too, for that matter. Don't you dare. She started. And as long as we're on that topic, I interrupted, you should start thinking about what we're going to tell Kyle. Her face froze. She couldn't speak. It'll be both of us, I said. We'll be polite and not blame each other. But you need to figure out what to say to Kyle. Lawyer girl, got it. She only nodded as fresh tears ran down her cheeks. I watched her for a minute, all my anger and fight leaving me. This felt like a weird sci-fi movie. Was I, like Harrison Ford in Blade Runner, a loving husband willing to give up without a fight? Or was I a cold robot, not willing to fight a losing battle? Me, West Point, class of '89. I'd fought and won a war. Every day, my right hip reminded me of the cost of that war. If I fought for my marriage and won, would I always remember the personal cost? Would I see Whitney's regret every day because we stayed together and she felt we held her back? Or would I be happy, with a stronger marriage and a happier son? Too overwhelmed, I left the garage. The next morning, I woke up an hour before the alarm. Whitney was in bed beside me, snoring softly. That surprised me. The manual seemed to say someone should be on the couch in this situation. Then again, what did I know? Divorce wasn't common for me. Nope. This was the first time. I thought back to our wedding and my best man's words. Are you sure this is what you want to do? My brother Mark had said. I smiled. It's not too late, Mark continued. Really? I assured him she's the one. Okay. He nodded. Just remember, you never want to be anyone's ex-husband, so keep it together, okay? And make sure she does too. I laughed. Will you quit worrying? That conversation played in my mind as I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, shaved, and showered. How could I do it? How could I keep my cool when I didn't even know what I'd done wrong? How do I help her keep it together when she's already given up on us and moved on? I just didn't know what to do. "Morning," Whitney said from the open doorway. I had just stepped out of the shower without thinking. I quickly stepped back in and pulled the shower curtain around me. "Jesus, Luke," she said, her sad face turning angry. "It's not like I've never seen you without clothes before." "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Back when we were close, right?" Her anger turned to surprise, like I'd slapped her. Part of me felt good for making a point, a hit just like the one I got last night. The other part of me felt bad for being so mean. After a few seconds, the happy part won. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, "I'd like to finish getting ready. I'm pretty sure the master bath is still there if you need it." She stared for a few seconds longer before closing the door. I got dressed in jeans and a golf shirt, reading the paper and drinking coffee while Kyle ate his cereal and toast. Halfway through my second and final cup of coffee, Whitney came out from our bedroom. "Hey!" Mom called. Kyle said cheerfully. "Morning, sweetie," she said, bending to kiss his cheek before pouring herself a cup of coffee. I felt her eyes on me, but I just kept reading the paper. "You sleep okay last night?" she asked. "Looks like the Cubs are going to have another bad season, Dad," Kyle said. I lowered the paper. "What, little man? Mom asked if you slept okay last night." "Oh," I said, then smiled at him. "No, me neither," Whitney said. I ignored her and went back to reading the paper. She gave a light sigh, and I sensed her losing energy. "Can we talk?" she asked. I lowered the paper again, trying to stay calm for Kyle. "About what? Last night? There's more? Going to somehow top yourself?" She looked at Kyle, who was busy with his cereal and comics. "Please," she said with a nod. She shook her head. "Later tonight, maybe? When I get home tonight, then," I said, raising the paper back up and reading again about how the Cubs had no real chance and were still going to lose. I was packing my notes and books into my briefcase after the 20th century American history class. I heard the doors clanging as students left, and bits of conversations about parties or dates filled the room. "You okay, Professor?" I looked up. Heather Farley was standing a few feet in front of the lectern, her concerned face looking even more worried. She was 21, a natural blonde with long, straight hair and a body that turned heads. "I'm fine, Miss Farley," I said. "Is there something I can do for you?" "You don't seem fine," she said, lowering her voice so others couldn't hear. "You seem distracted and upset." I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You can tell these things." "Welcome to life," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Some days are just better than others." Heather looked at me, saying nothing. Her bright green eyes made contact with mine and didn't let go. Her lips pressed together. "So if there's nothing else," I said, snapping my briefcase shut, "I've got to run. If you need to talk to someone, I'm a good listener. I'll keep that in mind, Miss Farley." "Okay." She turned, picked up her book bag, and walked out. My eyes followed her until she disappeared into the hallway. "Pretty sweet, Haydock," Tony Granger said with a broad grin. "Indeed, Mr. Granger, pretty sweet indeed." If faculty lounge gossip was true, Heather Farley had comforted at least one faculty member during her 3 years at Chadwick College. I had always thought the professor was sleazy for getting involved with her. Now I envied him, and I'm sure it was her who made the first move. "So who do I see?" I asked. "And you're asking me why," Doug Morrissey said. "Because you've gone through this before and you're asking me to relive the whole mess?" "No," I insisted. "I'm just asking which lawyer I should call. I mean, come on, man. I don't know anything about attorneys." He sighed, his face sagging with the breath he let out. "Just tell me who you used," I pleaded with the English lit professor. "Don't use him. He was useless. Absolutely pathetic." "Well, did you see anyone else that might be good?" He nodded, grimacing at the memory. "Jermaine's attorney, Rebecca Galarza. She works for Eric Taylor. I think they're partners now. Their offices are in Grant City." He nodded. "And they're good. She's good." He looked at me, frowning. "Remember my 61 Triumph? My pride and joy?" I nodded. "I think Jermaine used it to pay her legal fees, my car to pay her lawyers, and she got it in the divorce, along with almost everything else." "Sorry," I said, feeling glad I didn't have anything I loved as much to lose in the divorce. Well, nothing except my battle dioramas in the basement. But Whitney would never want any of those. No, I had nothing to lose in the divorce. Nothing except Kyle, which was everything. "You okay?" Doug said. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "What if I lose him?" I asked. "What if she gets custody?" He reached across the table and put his hand on my shoulder. "Listen to me, Luke." I looked at him, tensing at his serious tone. "Is there any way this can be fixed? I don't know what's going on, honestly. Everything came out of nowhere. We were sitting at the kitchen table, Kyle doing his math homework and me filling out a form from the lawyer's office. Whitney walked in around 5. Kyle's face lit up and he ran to her. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, hugging him tight. "How was school?" "It was okay," he said, breaking free and running back to finish his homework. I watched him go. Whitney then put her hand on my shoulder. I looked at her, and she quickly pulled her hand back. "Sorry," she said. I went back to my form. Whitney sat down across from me. "So you didn't wait to talk to me, did you?" she asked. "Wait for what?" I replied. "To see a lawyer," she said, pointing to the form. "They're good," she said. "You could have done a lot worse." "Could I have done better?" I asked. "Not really," she shrugged. "Why the hurry? Why not wait for us to talk?" she continued. "Is it going to do any good?" I asked. "Have you changed your mind? Decided to give us another chance?" She struggled to find the right words, her face showing her inner conflict. "Kyle, honey," I called to my son, "go finish your homework in your room. Mom and I need to talk." "Sure, Dad," he said, easily compliant. Turning back to Whitney, I said, "You wanted to talk. We've got about half an hour before he finishes his homework. What's going on?" "Why are you rushing this?" she exclaimed. "You've already seen a lawyer? If I didn't push you to talk last night, you wouldn't have told me anything until you were gone, right?" She didn't answer, but her face did. "Whitney, I don't want to be surprised again. I don't want to come home to find you gone and the locks changed." "I wouldn't do that to you," she said weakly. "Really?" I laughed bitterly. "What have you done then?" "I told you I'm confused. I need time to sort myself out." "You said sorting yourself out might involve another man," I reminded her. "I'm not with anyone," she shouted. "You've just what? Held hands? Had lunches? Maybe a kiss or two?" "This has nothing to do with him," she screamed. "This is about you and me," I said firmly. "Why are you unhappy? Is it because I do most of the housework, feeding Kyle, making sure he's okay?" "Your hours are lighter than mine," she muttered. "And I've never complained, so why now?" "When have I ever told you to cut back or thrown it in your face?" I added. She had no answer. Tears streamed down her face. I grabbed some paper towels and put them in front of her. "Your tears mean nothing to me now. Don't I at least deserve an explanation?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm just not happy." "Then get a different job," I suggested. "Why start with us instead of seeing if taking a new job might make you happier? Is changing our family really your first choice?" She turned to the window, wiping her tears and blowing her nose. She was trying to calm down. "If everything is as bad as you said last night, why not change just one thing? Maybe get a new job, work less, or switch to a different kind of work." "Why change everything?" she mumbled, staring outside. Her voice was so soft I had to lean closer to hear. "Sometimes I want to run away, leave everything behind, maybe go to a small cabin in the mountains." She almost smiled at the thought. "Except when you're with him," I guessed. Her smile vanished, and she looked guilty. "You're not denying it," I said. She closed her eyes and leaned back. "He's easy to talk to. He makes me feel better, like everything will be okay. Maybe it's because I share my problems with him." "Maybe it's because you haven't talked to me for months," I replied. She turned to face me. "But you've got so much to deal with already. You do enough for us." I smiled a little. "Really? If I do so much, why couldn't you take one small step to save us? Why find comfort with someone else and let our family fall apart? You think I have a lot to handle? I wouldn't mind doing more to keep us happy, to keep us together. Or am I just a servant doing all the work?" She slumped into the chair, looking beaten. "But you already do." "Enough. I feel guilty all the time, like you're the only one trying. Like you're perfect and I'm not even needed." I reached out and took her hand. She hesitated, but then held mine. "If you want to do more," I said, trying to smile, "I'm fine letting you cut back on your hours a bit. Maybe just come home around this time every night. I'd love for you to be more involved in the fun stuff you miss, like cooking," she smiled, "and cleaning, homework, mowing the lawn, everything." Her small hand squeezed mine and she lifted her head. "I don't know if I want to do that. The choice is yours. I want us to stay together, for our son. Keeping us together or breaking us apart is up to you." I let go of her hand and walked away. She tried to say something, but I kept going. The next night, Whitney came home just after 5 again. By 5:30, we were done with dinner, and I stood up. "Where are you going?" she asked as I moved toward the basement door. "To the basement," I said. "You clean up tonight. I'm going to play with my soldiers." "I thought we could talk more," she said. "You know where I'll be," I replied without looking back. In the basement, I turned on the lights and saw something I hadn't really looked at or used in 3 years. Having a son made me put my hobbies aside. On the tables before me were scenes from famous battles in history. The first table showed Thermopylae, the hot gates. I had built a mountain to the west and the sea to the east, with a narrow beach in between. King Leonidas and his Spartans, along with soldiers from other Greek city-states, were fighting to hold back King Xerxes and his massive Persian army. The Persians had a spy and attacked the Greeks from behind. The brave Greeks fought for 3 days, giving the other Greek cities time to prepare for defense. Next, I walked to the Gettysburg table. It wasn't the famous charges, it was the start of the battle. Brigadier General Buford's cavalry and the Iron Brigade fought to hold off the Confederate soldiers. They kept the high ground, which was crucial for the Union's success. The cost was high, including the life of Major General John Reynolds, who was killed in the first minutes of the fight. There were 2 more complete battle scenes and one that was half finished, showing the tunnels packed with explosives beneath trenches from World War I. Hannibal and his Carthaginian forces were closing in on the Roman troops at Cannae, encircling them completely. This was the height of Carthaginian power in the Second Punic War. I didn't focus much on that. The battle and tactics weren't as important to me right then. I was thinking about traitors and the need to stay strong. I stopped at the last table, touching the rough and broken landscape of Stalingrad. It was the biggest model I had ever made. Bombed-out buildings, Pavlov's house, the tractor factory, streets filled with rubble, and the Mamayev Kurgan Hill overlooking the destroyed city and the Volga River. It had taken me months to get it right. The only figures were boats carrying reinforcements across the Volga amidst fake water explosions. I needed to start adding Russian and German soldiers and weapons, filling the dying city with dying men. I felt tired looking at the scene. A dying city, dying men, marriage troubles, maybe fatherhood challenges. I turned at the sound on the stairs. "Dad, over here!" I called, trying to clear my mind. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to make some soldiers. Can I help?" "Sure," I said, waving him over. "Get over here, little man." He smiled big and rushed to my side. "What's this?" he asked, his eyes wide. "This is what happens when people hate each other," I said, pulling him close. He nodded. "It's pretty sad." "Yep. So what are we going to make?" He sounded excited. "We're going to start making some soldiers." I spent the next 2 hours showing Carl how to shape soldiers from clay and then make plaster casts. Whitney never came down. After I got Kyle bathed, brushed, and into bed, I went back to the living room and pulled out my book on the Punic Wars. The Third Punic War. I knew it well. Carthage had finished paying Rome from the Second Punic War, and as Rome's population grew, they decided to conquer Carthage and its farmlands. They besieged Carthage and starved its people. When the Carthaginians surrendered, they were enslaved, and the city was destroyed. Carthage ceased to exist. The Romans used trickery to start the war, and they lived with the curse of their actions. Kyle and I spent Saturday morning molding soldiers and pouring molten tin into the molds. Around 11:30, Whitney appeared at the basement stairs. "Do you think that's wise?" "What? Letting our son play with molten metal?" "He's not playing with it," I said. "He's learning how to do something right and safely." "Still," she said. "Come on, Mom," Carl said. "I'm just holding the funnel and I have to wear this." He showed his arm covered with a big fireproof glove. "And it's fun," he added. "We're making soldiers." "Well," she started, then stopped talking. I turned back to pour the last cast. "Ready?" I asked. Carl confirmed. I poured the metal, my hand over his, guiding his funnel. When the cast was full, we finished up together. Whitney was still there, a soft look on her face. "Do you two need to do more? Do you need us for something?" I asked. She struggled, avoiding my eyes. "I was going to go out for a while. Can you watch him for a few hours?" I stared at her. "You said you wanted to spend more time with Kyle." She sighed. "I know, but—" "That talk," I said, "will be tonight after dinner, so don't be late." She looked at me and then nodded tightly. "What talk, Dad?" Kyle looked worried. I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. "Don't worry about it, okay?" His face showed he was worried. "I don't want to say more now, Kyle. It's a family talk." "Like when I wanted a dog?" "Sort of like that. But a bit worse," he guessed. "Yeah." "Did I do something wrong?" I hugged him tight. "Not at all," I whispered. "Not at all, little man." Whitney was home when Kyle and I got back from the park at 3. If she had spent the time with someone else, it didn't show. Instead, she was a bundle of nerves, sitting at the dining table with a cookbook and looking at us when we walked in, then back to the book. "You want to do this now?" She shook her head. "I'd rather just talk to you for a few minutes." "Why don't you go hop in the bath now?" I said to Kyle. "But Dad," he pleaded, "hop in the bath, get cleaned up, put on your pajamas, and we'll order some pizza and stay up late watching movies, okay?" His smile grew wide. "Deal," he said. "Okay," I replied. Once Kyle was in the bathroom running his bath, I sat at the table. "I'm confused." "About what?" I asked. "About everything." I nodded but said nothing. After a minute, Whitney spoke again. "It's just that, I don't know. It all seemed like such a great idea, like a dream I had in my head." "And it was getting better and better the more I thought about it," she said. I still stayed silent, just leaning back in my chair, watching her. "Are you going to say something?" she asked. "I'm listening," I said, "trying to understand what's going on here, just like I have been for the past 4 days." "I told you," she said. "I maybe got lost in a fantasy world. And with another man," I added. "Someone else was part of it. How much have you been daydreaming about him?" "I told you I haven't been with anyone else." "Then what have you been doing?" She looked out the window. "That's what I thought," I said. "And still, you won't tell me? You just tell me I'm not the one for you anymore and I don't know why. You won't tell me what I can do to fix it. You won't even tell me who this other guy is." "I shouldn't have to compete with someone else, Whitney. We're married. We're not kids in junior high. We're not just going steady." "I'm sorry, Luke," she said. "I can't help it. It's just that I don't know." "I remember, it's just how you feel. But tell me this, did you start feeling like this before he came into your life or after?" "What difference does it make?" "I'm asking because I want to know if these feelings started on their own or if he helped you to let go of me." "It's not like that," she said. "See?" I leaned back in the chair again. "There you go again, defending this guy you won't tell me about. You won't tell me what you've been doing with him. It's like you think you have the right to keep all of this secret from me. You tell me you're leaving, that there's someone else, but you won't tell me what I did wrong, or who he is, or what he is to you, or what you're doing with him." "I'm entitled to a life of my own too," she argued. "You're right, Whitney. You're entitled to a life of your own. And that's what you're going to get. A life of your own, on your own." Her eyes went wide. "What are you—" "I have a meeting on Monday afternoon. I'm going to hire a lawyer." "But I don't." "You don't? What, Whitney? You don't want a divorce? But you still want to keep your little secret friend on the side? Keep things from me? You want me to keep living with a wife who suddenly doesn't love me anymore? You want me to play second fiddle to another man? Be his support?" Tears streamed down her face. "Why are you pushing this? Why can't you give me some time?" "Did you give me time? Did you give me a chance to make you happy? Did you think about your marriage before bringing another man into your life? I guess you know the answer. My so-called legally wedded wife, I haven't been with him yet. Her face showed deep hurt, torn between feelings. It broke my heart and softened my anger. Do you really think there's any hope for us? I don't know. Maybe there is some chance, she nodded. Better than 50-50. I don't know. I thought about what Doug had said. Whatever it takes. Do anything to avoid a divorce. Keep the marriage together. When will you know? I asked. She shrugged. Would you see someone? Maybe a therapist or a counselor? Suddenly, her face grew angry. For what? You think I'm crazy just because I may not want to be with you anymore? I bit my tongue and took a breath. No. I think maybe you're going through a tough time. Because I'm not happy with us. Because I don't want to be married to you anymore. And there you have it, I said, pushing back from the table. You can't even tell me the truth. What do you mean? Moments ago you said you didn't know if we still had a chance. Now you're saying you don't want to be married to me anymore? That's not what I said. But it's what you meant, I said. I walked around the table toward the bathroom to check on Kyle. She reached out her arm to stop me, and I paused without looking at her. I said, we'll give him one last happy night tonight. Get ready for the talk with him tomorrow. Her hand gripped my shirt, trying to hold me there. I reached down and gently pried her fingers off me, then continued to the bathroom. I was now seriously questioning if Doug's advice was worth the price. I had just a few seconds to get my emotions in check, so my little boy wouldn't realize his world was about to change. Rebecca Galarza was stunning. The kind of beauty that distracted you. She had a look about her that made you think about her the whole time you were around her. She walked into the small waiting room and held out her hand. Mr. Patterson, she said. Luke, I corrected, trying not to stare. She seemed to be in her mid-30s, dressed simply in a white blouse and tan pants, yet those simple colors somehow made her smooth olive skin and long black hair stand out even more. Her face was like a classic Spanish beauty with high cheekbones, a narrow chin, big brown eyes, and full lips. Her body looked like a model's, but what really stood out was the way she carried herself and the way she looked at you, direct, challenging. It was a look that seemed to dare you to get close to her. Many men must have tried, but as I noticed her empty ring finger, none had succeeded. So, Luke, she said after a moment, smiling and her eyes shining. Right, was all I could say. She waved me toward a door and I walked past her into a meeting room. Okay, she said, taking a pair of glasses from her pocket to read my form. Why don't you tell me what's happening? She asked. I don't know, I replied. She raised an eyebrow. You don't know? Seriously, Whitney, my wife says she's unhappy with her job, our marriage, me, pretty much everything. Is she going through a rough time? A death in the family or someone sick? Pressure at work? I shrugged. No one died and no one's sick that I know of. I'd have heard about it. Work has been busy. There's a big drug case happening now. She squinted. Your wife's Whitney Patterson, the prosecutor? I nodded. Is that a problem? Not really. It's just that most judges will step away from the case. We'll likely get one from another county. She shrugged. It's hard to know how another judge will act, but it shouldn't be an issue with your office. She shook her head. I'll check with my partner, but I doubt it. She continued. I actually used to work with her 4 years ago. Were you friends or just colleagues? I asked. We were colleagues, she said, shaking her head. We never hung out outside work. She says you two are good, I mentioned. She nodded like it was no big deal. So back to what's going on. Is there someone else? She asked. Yeah. She says they're just friends, but I'm pretty sure that's not the whole story. How serious is it? She questioned. No idea. She won't say. She pressed her lips together, and for a moment, I imagined leaning across the table to kiss her. She smiled, seeing my glasses, and said, It says you have a little boy together. Have you thought this through? How do you mean? I asked. Are you sure you don't want to wait and see if she changes? She leaned over the table. I shook my head. Pride, the other man, it's partly that, but mainly it's her refusal to tell me what's wrong. She just doesn't want me. I don't know why. I do everything for her, for us, for our family. I'm the one who takes care of Kyle. Mostly. I do most of the housework and support her career, but she doesn't love me anymore. Rebecca wrote quickly on a pad. When you say you do most things, including taking care of Kyle, what do you mean? Who makes his breakfast? Usually me. Who helps him with homework? Me. Laundry? Me. Dinner? Me, I listed. She looked into my eyes, hers bright with interest. "He's in first grade?" she asked. I nodded. "Did you go to the parent-teacher conferences?" "Of course," I replied. "Did Whitney?" "She couldn't get out of the office." Rebecca smiled. "Do you want custody?" My eyes widened. Is that possible? From what I'm hearing, it's not only possible, it's likely. "Really?" I asked, surprised. She nodded, chuckling. "The judge won't care about gender. They look at who the primary caregiver is. The one taking care of the child gets custody." I was shocked. I thought Whitney would get custody because she was the mother. Now this confident woman was telling me I had a strong chance. "Well," she asked, "do you want custody?" "Of course," I said. "And you'll be able to handle it with your job as a history professor at Chadwick?" "Yes," I confirmed. She smiled broadly. "Custody to LP," she wrote on her pad. "Now, let's go over your finances." I felt like I was walking on air as I left the law offices of Taylor and Galarza. The divorce would be tough, but not as bad as I feared. The property split would likely be 50-50. Alimony was unlikely, and best of all, I'd probably get custody of Kyle. I drove to the park to pick up Kyle. He was with Sally, our neighbor, and her kids. "Dad!" Kyle shouted from the swings when he saw me. "Hey, little man," I said, as he jumped off the swing and ran into my arms. "You doing okay?" I asked, holding him close. "Yeah," he whispered, hugging me tight. I squeezed him back, knowing more tough times were ahead, and he would cry again over losing his family the way it used to be. "I love you," I said. "You know that, right?" "I love you too," he replied, looking up at me. "Can we go home and make more toy soldiers?" "Absolutely," I said. I gently put him down when my hip started to hurt from his weight. We said goodbye to Sally. She was calm, even with her 4 kids running around and yelling. "Thanks," I said as we left. "Anytime, Doc," she replied. Sally and her husband, Charlie, always called me Doc, even though everyone else called me Professor. They seemed proud to live next door to a real professor, even though neither of them went to college. For them, it was proof that an electrician and his wife could still make it in America and live near folks with higher education. They weren't honoring me. They were reminding themselves of their success. Watching Sally calmly manage her 4 noisy kids made me realize how good they had it. I envied them. They had enough money to be happy in a nice home, and they spent time together and with their kids. Their love for each other was clear to anyone who saw them. I couldn't imagine them ever being in my shoes. I only got my degree to escape my father's business. Now my family was falling apart, and I would soon have a full-time job and full-time parenting. So much for the 7 years of higher education for both Whitney and me. We were failing at the most important thing, our family. Whitney came home at 5:30. "Hey, baby," she said to Kyle. "Hi, Mom," he mumbled without looking up from his homework. "No hug?" she asked. He sighed, got up, gave her a brief hug, then went back to his homework. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Spelling. Dad already helped me." She looked sad as she turned to me. I felt bad for Kyle, not her. He was too young to understand, but he knew enough to blame Whitney. Whitney lowered her head and went to change in the bedroom. "Want to help me for a second?" I asked Kyle. "Sure," he said, smiling. I handed him a vegetable peeler. "Let's peel some carrots, okay?" "Okay," he said and started peeling. "You know," I started, unsure of what to say. "What?" "She's your mom," I said. "She loves you very much, more than you'll ever know until you have kids of your own someday." He didn't say anything, but his bottom lip began to stick out. "You should maybe give her a break, little man." "Why? She's the one leaving, Dad." I knelt beside him. "But it's not because of you, okay? You have to believe that." "I don't care," he said louder. "Who cares why she's leaving? All that matters is she's leaving and I won't see you anymore." Tears ran down his cheeks. "Sure you will," I said, wiping his tears. "We'll see each other all the time." "That's not what Tammy Pulaski says. She says she never sees her dad. Never." I hugged him. "But you're not Tammy Pulaski and I'm not her dad. Even if you move to the South Pole, I'll still see you, got it?" He nodded. "If I have to wrestle polar bears to get to you, I will." He giggled through his tears. "Why would you fight polar bears?" Just let them try to get between me and you, I said. He giggled more and went back to peeling. Dad, he said after a few minutes. Yeah? Can we make some more toy soldiers after supper? We'll ask your mom. If she says it's okay, then we will. Fair enough? I suppose so. It was almost 11 before I went to bed. The lights were off, and I changed into my flannel pajamas when Whitney spoke. Thank you, she said. For what? For talking to Kyle earlier. I heard you. I grunted. She was silent as I got into bed, staring at the ceiling. Luke, she said. I didn't answer. We had been sleeping in the same bed since things went bad, but we hadn't talked. Talking now felt strange. Why are you wearing pajama bottoms to bed? She asked. I thought about that. It wasn't a planned choice like using the other bathroom. Are you still awake? She asked. Yeah, Whit, I'm still awake. She moved closer until her face was near mine. I want to talk, she said. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because it's not because you don't want me anymore. I just want to talk, she clarified. I turned on the light and faced her. What's going on here? She took a deep breath. We feel like strangers all of a sudden. I let out a bitter laugh. No kidding. You know what I mean? She asked. No, Whit, I don't. I'm still trying to understand how one day you want someone else and the next day you want me again. I don't want anyone else, she said. Really? Could have fooled me. But I don't. Sure, here's a simpler version of the text with the explicit content removed. Yeah, well, I guess the point is that you really don't want me either. I got out of bed. Where are you going? She asked. The couch, I answered, grabbing a pillow. Staying here doesn't seem like a good idea anymore. Please, she said. I looked at her lying there, looking so vulnerable. It had been almost 5 weeks since I felt close to someone. Please, look. She reached out, touching my pants. I wanted to stay. I wanted to throw off my clothes and jump back into bed. But the images of the past week rushed into my head. I'm signing the papers on Thursday, I said, my voice dry. Her hand stopped, and I saw fear in her eyes. What papers? The divorce papers, I replied. They'll be ready on Thursday. She pulled her hand back and curled up. You can pick them up at the sheriff's office to avoid a scene at work or home, I explained. She just stared at a spot on the wall, lost in thought. I looked at her for a moment. My thoughts of being close to her were gone now. I reached over, turned off the light, and walked to the sofa. You chose this for us, Whit, I said while walking away. I don't know if in a few days you'll be with your new man or not, but as long as I'm here, you'll sleep alone. The next day, I was with Doug. What's your hurry, Luke? Doug Morrissey asked. Hurry on, Peggy Marsh added as she sat next to me and put her tray on the table. Doug looked at me for permission to speak. He's getting a divorce, Doug said. Peggy didn't react. She buttered her dinner roll and dipped it into her soup. Did you hear me? Doug asked. I heard, she said, eating the roll and looking at me the whole time. Is it because of another woman? Peggy asked. No, I replied. Is she seeing someone else? Peggy continued. Sort of, I admitted. Well, yes or no, Peggy pressed. Probably not, I said, but there's someone else. Another guy. She says they're not together, but I don't know if she's honest. Then she probably is, Peggy said, eating her soup. She says she's confused, I added, sipping my coffee. She's in a rut, unhappy with work and with me. Peggy nodded, eating quietly. You think she's just going through something? Doug asked Peggy. Like what? She asked. I don't know. Her period or depression. Peggy laughed. Men always think it's our time of the month if we act differently. You know what I mean, Doug said. You're the expert here. Okay, give me more, Peggy asked. Has she been withdrawn? Yeah, for a few months, I answered. Is she sleeping more than normal? No, I said. Is she looking more undone or unkempt? I shook my head. None of that, I said. Then it's probably not depression, Peggy said. It could be, but she doesn't show the signs. She finished her soup. So what are you doing about it? She asked. I'm signing the divorce papers tomorrow, I said. Seems quick, Doug said. It's a lot, I confessed. She only told me she wanted a separation 10 days ago, and she was seeing someone else. I can't just sit back. I can't just wait and let her decide when to drop the news. I need some control over my life and family." "Exactly," Peggy said, "including the control to end it." "Why?" I mumbled, looking from Doug to Peggy. They were an odd pair. Doug, a burly literature professor, divorced with a messy life, and Peggy, late 30s, never married, and a clinical psychologist with a strict outlook on life. "Ever had the love of your life suddenly tell you she doesn't love you anymore and is seeing someone else?" I asked. Doug sighed and nodded. "Yeah. You?" I asked Peggy. "Not really," she replied. "It's horrible," I said. "It left me feeling empty and useless. It was betrayal. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like something was wrong with me. It wasn't just to me, it was to our son Kyle, too. She became a stranger." "You're trying to understand?" Peggy asked. "At first I did," I said. "Not anymore. Now I just don't want her to control what happens next because I don't think I can handle it." "Bingo," Peggy nodded. "Seems healthy enough." "Really?" Doug and I said at the same time. "Sure," Peggy said. "You're not stupid. I don't know your whole history, but I can guess. You're not doing this to get revenge or to hurt her back. You've thought this through." This version simplifies the vocabulary and sentence structures while keeping the story intact. I decided I couldn't keep playing by her rules and on her schedule. I needed to take charge. "Exactly," I said. "That's right," Doug agreed, though he looked unsure. Peggy had one more thing to add. "What's that?" I asked. "Remember," she said, "this is just my guess." Peggy got up from the booth and picked up her tray. "I haven't talked to her, watched her, or seen anything myself, so it's just a guess." "Okay, but I think she was with him. Whoever he is, she was with him. It felt like a punch in the stomach. She didn't come to you because she was sad," Peggy continued. "She came because she felt guilty. Guilty for living a double life. Guilty that while she was with him, you were doing everything for her." I was speechless. Whitney still swore she wasn't with him, and I had believed her. Not completely. Who wouldn't have doubts? But she was so sure about it. "Maybe it was just once," Peggy went on. "Maybe a few times. It could still be happening. Last night I finally said when I went to bed she was still awake, and she tried to get close to you, didn't she?" I nodded. Peggy smiled. "Then the affair is probably over. Her guilt is likely too much to handle, and being with you might help her feel less guilty, but it won't." I protested, but she thinks it will. Peggy hesitated like she wanted to say more. "What?" Doug finally asked. "Just thinking," she said. "Thinking what? That I wouldn't want to be you right now. Why? Because your decision just got a whole lot harder." "How so?" "Before," Peggy said, "you filed for divorce because she rejected you. Now, though, she's not rejecting you anymore. If I'm right, she's trying to fix everything. She wants to forget what happened and make you forget it too, so things can go back to normal. So now I'm the one pushing for the divorce, even though she probably doesn't want it anymore." Peggy nodded and gave me a small smile. "Good luck with that." I just slumped. "Where's Kyle?" Whitney said when she walked in the door. "Next door," I said, watching him play in the backyard. I heard her hang up her jacket and walk towards me. I was surprised and froze when she put her arms around my waist and hugged me from behind. "I don't want a divorce," she whispered. "When did you stop seeing him?" I asked without moving. She didn't answer. "When was the last time you were with him?" "I said I didn't do that," she said in a small voice. "You're lying." I unclasped her hands from my waist and turned to face her. "So when was it? Saturday when you had to go out?" She stayed quiet. "Or maybe during lunch on Monday," I pressed. She looked at me, silently pleading for me to stop. I didn't back down. I needed answers. I said I didn't sleep with him. She finally said, "Fine. When's the last time you were with him?" "When, Whitney?" She covered her ears. "Why don't you believe me?" "Because I don't," I shouted. "I think you had an affair and were ready to leave me for him. But now I think you've changed your mind, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because you really love me, or you just don't want to lose everything we have. Or maybe he dumped you after using you." "I do love you, Luke. I'm sorry. I just forgot for a while." I looked at her and it was clear she was serious. Her face showed it. Everything about her was begging me to forgive her, to hold her and say it would be okay. "Say something," she pleaded. "Please, Luke, say you still love me. I never stopped loving you. but it feels like you forgot me and found someone else. I'm sorry, she said, hugging me tightly. I'm so sorry. I didn't hug her back, and she noticed. Look, she said, looking me in the eyes. I saw Rebecca early. I signed the papers an hour ago, but you can. Yes, I can, and I will, Whitney. I'm going through with it. You still won't tell me the truth, and I can't just ignore everything. I can't live my life afraid it will happen again. I can't do it. I can't go through this again. She collapsed into a chair, crying and saying sorry over and over. I went to get Kyle and take him out for a burger. There are a few things they never tell you about divorce. First, you might still live together while the courts handle everything. That's why Whitney stayed in the house until the final judgment, even though everyone knew I'd keep it. My parents gave it to me, so Whitney had no claim to it, but she could live there until the divorce was final. Second, even simple divorces can take forever. If everything is agreed upon, it might wrap up in 3 months. But if there's even a small disagreement, it could take 1.5 years. That's 1.5 years of still living together, by the way. I still shudder at the thought. Third, it's really hard to live together while going through a divorce. Doug was right. It was way worse than I ever imagined. Once we had all the financial details sorted out, Rebecca suggested we have a settlement conference to finish things faster. I was surprised to see a lawyer trying to finish quickly and cheaply. Professor Patterson, Whitney's lawyer, said, "I'm Jim McNally, Whitney's attorney," and shook my hand. He was tall, around 50, with gray hair. Rebecca had described him to me before, handsome and sharp. He was very good at what he did, which seemed strange for a lawyer. "Call me Luke," I said. "Nice to meet you, Jim." He greeted and hugged Rebecca, and it looked like they knew each other for a long time. How do they do it? How can lawyers be so friendly, then fight each other so hard? Lawyers are a different kind of people. We walked into McNally's conference room, and Whitney was already there, looking nervous. "So," McNally said once we all sat down, "how are we going to fix this mess?" He looked at me, and so did Whitney, but I stayed quiet like Rebecca had told me. Rebecca spoke up. "It's really simple. Joint custody of Kyle. Luke stays the main caregiver." McNally interrupted. "Luke stays the main caregiver?" He looked at Whitney, who didn't look back. Rebecca confirmed, "He's taking care of the boy now, so why change?" McNally seemed surprised. "When you say Luke is taking care of Kyle, you mean he's—" Rebecca looked at me and nodded. I explained. "I feed him, help with homework, go to teacher meetings, take him to the doctor, get him to school. I handle it all." "You're saying she does nothing?" McNally asked. I looked at Whitney and said, "Not at all. She helps when she can, but I have more time because of my schedule." I explained that Whitney works longer hours, so I have always taken care of Kyle more. McNally looked back at us. "Let's set aside the caregiver issue for now. What about visitation?" "Standard," Rebecca replied. McNally nodded. "Non-custodial parent pays 20% of their net income to the custodial parent," she said. "They divide health insurance costs equally or keep him on their policies. Same with uncovered medical bills and school fees." McNally wrote this down. "And finances? The house is a non-marital asset. You're giving Whitney a bigger share based on this?" Rebecca had warned me about this. Even though the house was mine, the court could consider my total assets when dividing property. Since I had a $200,000 house, the judge might give Whitney more of the marital assets. "What does she want?" McNally asked. He hesitated, then said, "She's got a 401k plan." Rebecca smiled. "I noticed that during discovery. Luke knew nothing about it." I looked at Whitney, who stared at her legal pad, and wondered what else she was keeping from me. McNally continued, "It's worth 90 grand. She wants to keep it and split everything else 50-50. Pensions stay with each person since they are almost equal. Splitting them would cost more than they're worth. Kyle's things stay with him, wherever he ends up. I don't want to waste time on other stuff, do you?" "Not really," Rebecca said. McNally looked at me. "You think you and Whitney will have trouble splitting personal property?" I glanced at Rebecca, who nodded, then at Whitney, who wouldn't look at me. "No," I said. "As long as I keep my things, I don't care about the rest." "Whitney?" he asked. "That's fine," she agreed. McNally asked Rebecca, "Can you give us 10 minutes?" She nodded, and we left the room. Outside, Rebecca lit a cigarette. "So, is it going well?" I asked, feeling stressed. "Oh yeah," she said, exhaling smoke and smiling. Better than I expected. How so? I asked. Remember what I told you? Don't lie to me. I nodded. Now you see why. The custody issue surprised him. You mean she lied? I asked. It's not exactly a lie, Rebecca explained. It's more like she can't see the facts clearly. She thinks she's the perfect mom, even if she's not. That's how she sees it. She's scared he won't like her if he thinks she's a bad mom. Also, she can't admit to herself that you're doing most of the work. But she admitted it to me. She's a lawyer. How doesn't she know this? Rebecca shrugged. She's never been in private practice, and being a mother usually overrides everything else. So she's not being honest with herself. Kind of like that. But how do you know it's not me who's lying? Did you see her face when you finished talking? Not really. She just seemed to shrink in her chair. Exactly. If you were lying, she would have challenged you. But she didn't say a word. And McNally, he knows that, of course. And he's probably telling her right now that she has almost no chance of winning a custody fight, and even if she does, it's going to cost her a lot. I thought about this while Rebecca finished her cigarette. It was nearly 20 minutes before McNally called us back in to talk about the 401k split. He said once we were all seated, "You didn't really answer me, Becca." She smiled. "I'm looking to settle everything," she said. "All of it, including custody." He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "And if we give up residential custody?" She looked at me and I nodded back. "Give up residential custody and she can have it." "And if not?" he asked, looking at Whitney. Rebecca also turned to Whitney to make the point clear. "If she doesn't agree, we'll go for a 50-50th split of everything, including custody. And we'll still end up with residential custody." Whitney looked up, her eyes meeting mine and holding there. McNally looked at her. "Do you need a couple of days to think this over?" Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and I thought she was going to break down. But before she did, she shook her head. "Write it all up," she said, holding herself together. "I'll sign it." I didn't react. I was amazed. It was all so simple. It was early August, a little more than 5 months after Whitney first told me she didn't love me. And now, with everything written down and all our money stuff shared with each other, it took less than an hour around a conference table to split up and divide 10 years of married life. I was kind of disappointed it could all be so simple to just end a family. Rebecca told me how we should do it, and that's how we were doing it. On a hot Saturday morning, 2 weeks later, the paperwork was all ready and signed, and the final hearing would be in 4 days. We had to split up our personal stuff now, or the hearing would be delayed until we could. So there we stood in the den, putting stickers on the things we wanted. Yellow dot stickers for her, blue dot stickers for me. We'd already gone through the kitchen, dining room, and main bedroom. We had the family room, guest bedroom, and den left. Only a few words had been spoken, and we hadn't disagreed on a single item. It was a sad affair, and I was ready to disappear. I thought about just letting her keep everything. It would hurt less. "Remember this?" Whitney said, touching the frame as she looked at it. "I'll never forget," I said, looking at the 10 years younger version of us sipping drinks on the beach at Cabo during our honeymoon. "Remember what we did after those drinks?" I smiled, remembering how she had led me to a distant rocky spot and charmed me. I had been so lost in the moment, I'd forgotten to put my trunks back on until we almost got caught. She turned and looked at me, searching my face for an answer to her question. "What happened, Whit?" I said, my voice trembling. "What went wrong?" "I don't know," she said, her voice a whisper as the smile from the happy memory faded from her face. "I don't know." I wiped the tears from my cheeks, stuck a sticker on my desk and chair, and turned to her. "You can have everything else," I said. "Everything." "Look," she said to my retreating back. "I'm sorry, Luke." "Really?" But sorry wasn't enough anymore. 5 months later, she still wouldn't tell me why or who or what, for that matter. "Dad?" "Yeah, Kyle," I said, worried by the small tone of his voice. We were sprawled out on opposite ends of the couch, our feet touching as we read our books. "I'll still see her, right?" I closed the book against my chest. "Anytime you want," I said. "Promise?" "She's your mother," I said. "I'll never keep you from her, okay?" Thus ended week 1 post-marriage. She'd missed visiting on Wednesday night to get her apartment unpacked and set up. When I offered her the weekend starting tonight, she declined to finish getting settled in. She promised to be here on Wednesday. Right? I nodded. She's just trying to make her place nice for you, little man. His face said he didn't really believe me. Hey, I said, deciding that now was the time to surprise him. What? You still want that dog? His face lit up. You mean it? Sure, I said. I'd been wondering for a few months how to get excited about life again. He'd always wanted a dog, but Whitney had always said no. And I had never cared. Now that it was all over and Kyle wasn't getting any better, I knew it was now or never. What kind of dog? He said, tossing his book on the floor and crawling up to me. What kind do you want? I don't know, he said, his hands now on my shoulders, pinning me to the couch, his face full of excitement. Well, why don't we start looking around tomorrow? I said. That'll work, man, he said, his eyes sparkling. A dog. Then he jumped off the couch. Where are you going? I asked. Next door to tell Tyson. Back in 15 minutes. I called to him as he ran out the door. Sure thing, he called back. I didn't really know it at the time, but the next day would bring some big changes into our life. We were up bright and early the next morning. Actually, Kyle was up bright and early, and he was doing his best to get me moving as quickly as possible. Settle down, I said with a mouthful of toothbrush. But Dad, he said, standing next to me and combing his hair again. The boy liked neat hair. You promised. Nothing will be open for a while, buddy, I said, rinsing the toothpaste from my mouth and spitting it into the sink. Yeah, but nothing, I said, rubbing hot water on my cheeks to soften the stubble for my shave. We'll have some breakfast. Then we'll look for the perfect dog, okay? Sounds good, he said, running out of the bathroom so I could finish getting ready by 1. We visited 2 pet stores in Rockford and the Winnebago County Animal Shelter. None of the dogs excited Kyle much, so we decided to stop for lunch at the Grant City Tap before heading to the Lincoln County Animal Shelter. We had just ordered some burgers and sodas when Kyle waved at someone behind me. It's Miss Palmer, he said. Your teacher? I asked. I turned around and almost fell out of my seat. 2 women who looked like sisters were waving and smiling at us. I waved back, but it was a weak effort at best. One of the women whispered something to the other, and they both grinned. She's pretty, isn't she? Kyle said. I thought she was old, I said. Still, he agreed. She's pretty even if she is old. Which one is she? He looked back at them, smiled, nodded his head, and looked back at me. She's the one in the pink shirt, he said. Who's the one in the pink shirt? I heard from behind me. Hello, Kyle. Hi, Miss Palmer. I looked up at sparkling eyes and a gentle smile. I was asking him which one was his teacher, I said. Christine Palmer, she said, holding out her hand. Luke Patterson, I said, shaking her hand. She was beautiful, and I understood why people said she looked like a former cheerleader. She looked like she could still be in college. Her face was oval, smooth, with bright eyes and a small turned-up nose. Her lips were expressive and seemed to be thinking something about you. You hoped she was thinking what you were thinking about her. Her face was framed by short, light brown hair, parted slightly off-center, which suited her perfectly. She had a fit and healthy body. So you're the famous Professor Patterson, she said. It's an honor. I laughed. Just Luke, and I'm not so famous. I don't know about that, she said. Kyle here says you're a war hero with medals to prove it. Too dumb to duck, I said. Nothing heroic about that. We're looking for a puppy, Kyle blurted out. She looked at him with a soft expression. She loved kids. You could see it clearly. And what kind of puppy are you looking for? She asked. No idea, I said. We were just going to have some lunch and then go to the animal shelter to see what they have. Sounds like a plan, she said. The waitress arrived with our burgers and sodas. I'll leave you gentlemen to your lunch, she said. Happy hunting. I watched her walk away. See what I mean, Dad? Kyle said. Pretty, right? I had to force myself to keep my eyes on him. Sure, I said. I guess so. We were almost done with our burgers when Kristen came back to our table. Sorry to bother you, she said. I tried to finish chewing and swallow my food. No bother, I finally managed to say. It's just that I was talking to Allison, my cousin over there. She says she knows someone with a litter of puppies. There are 3 left. What kind of dogs? I asked. She smiled. Pugs, she said. Like from Men in Black? Kyle asked. Where did you see Men in Black? It's rated for older audiences. At Tyson's house, he said, then turned back to Kristen. That kind of dog? Those were the ones, she said, grinning widely. They're cool, Dad, Kyle said to me. Who's the friend? I asked. Tim and Nicole Franklin, she said. They own the bar and grill. I knew them by sight and they were about my age. Their kids helped out around the restaurant. Good food. So Allison knows them pretty well, she said. She can call them and see if it's okay for you to visit. Where do they live? Out on Seven Oaks. I looked at Kyle. Well, let's go see them, Dad, he said, pushing his half-finished burger and fries aside. If it's not too much trouble, I said to Kristen. No problem, she said, and walked back to her table. I noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Dad, Kyle whispered. You're staring. I turned back to face him, grinning. His eyes rolled to the ceiling. Geez, I left the money on our table and stopped at their table on the way out. Have a seat, Allison said. I don't want to interrupt, I said. We'll go with you, Kristen said, to show you how to get there. They're expecting us in half an hour, Allison said. We have time to finish our lunch. Okay. I looked from one to the other, amazed at how much the cousins looked alike. Sure, I could tell them apart. They were both stunning, and they both had a playful glint in their eyes. We watched Kyle giggling on the lawn as the three puppies, none bigger than a toy, climbed over him and licked and nipped at him. They all like him well enough, said Nicole Franklin. Maybe you'll take all three, her husband said, his arm around her shoulders. They were easy together, comfortable and happy. I caught Kristen looking at me, and her face mirrored my feelings. Gone was the playful smile and sparkling eyes. Instead, she had a knowing smile that told me she had once had this kind of happiness and lost it. What do you think? I asked her. I think you've got a choice to make here, she nodded. The male, I said to Tim. If it's okay, I think we'll take the male. The problem with women asterisk. Allison laughed lightly, but Kristen gave her a sharp look. Something changed in a split second. Allison's laugh turned into an awkward smile. That's great, Tim said. Let me get you a crate to take him home in. That's not really, I started to say. Never bought a puppy before, huh? Tim interrupted, smiling. Nope, I admitted. He chuckled and shook his head. Poor sucker. Nicole jumped in. Tim, don't discourage him yet. I'll grab us some beers, she said, heading towards the garage. I'll tell you all about taking care of a puppy. I wanted to argue, but Kristen spoke first. Sounds good, she said, her eyes fixed on me. They seemed to say, sit down and be quiet if you know what's best. I decided not to argue. Half an hour later, I felt more comfortable with my basic understanding of how to potty train and care for a puppy. The biggest lesson from Tim and Nicole was clear. I would be pretty busy for the next 6 months until the little pug grew up and was trained. Taking care of the puppy and my own son would be a lot of work. I know what you're thinking. What did you expect? To be honest, I didn't think about it much. I never had a dog as a kid. With Kyle, the idea of getting a dog came up, but Whitney always said no, so here we were. Life doesn't always go as planned, but seeing Kyle's face light up as he played with the little wheezing ball of fur, I knew I couldn't go back. He hadn't been this happy for months. I've never seen him like this, Kristen said, stepping beside me to watch Kyle play. I sighed. Yeah, it's been a while. She put a hand on my arm. I turned to face her. Hang in there, okay? I know this is tough, she said. I wanted to ask how she understood, but I remembered her bumpy marital past. I wasn't sure if Whitney had mentioned it, and I wondered if she had kids of her own. Her look told me she knew exactly what I was going through. Thanks, I said, for everything. I glanced at Kyle rolling in the grass, especially for this. No problem. The Franklins gave us enough food for the night and the next morning, plus a crate for the puppy to sleep in until we could go shopping for more supplies. When we got home, Kyle and I enjoyed our time in the backyard. What are we going to name him, Dad? Kyle called from the yard. I thought about it as I flipped the barbecue chicken and corn on the cob on the grill. Well, I said, do you have any ideas? Kyle picked up the little black-faced bundle of fur and walked toward the deck. I was thinking of a general or something, like the stuff you always read about. Like, generally? I asked. He shook his head. No, they said he's from China. Chinese, I corrected. He's from China, so things from China are called Chinese. Kyle ignored me. Are there any famous Chinese generals? He asked. I searched my memory. How about Sun Tzu? Who's he? Kyle asked. Thousands of years ago, he was a famous general who wrote a famous book. What was the book called? The Art of War, I answered. And it's still famous? Kyle asked. Still used today, I said with a smile. Kyle grinned. And we can call him Sonny for short. Sonny it is, I agreed. School started the next day, not with classes, but with endless meetings to prepare for classes. When the afternoon meetings ended, I sat at my office desk, sorting through resumes. I needed to find 2 research interns for the upcoming semester. The positions were paid, though not much, and the competition was fierce. Over 40 students had applied, which was about 2/3 of the seniors majoring in history or related fields. After an hour, I narrowed it down to 3 finalists, Randall Meeks, Jeremy Scott, and Heather Farley. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but you'd be wrong. Besides being very beautiful, Heather was a solid writer and researcher and had been on the dean's list every semester. I arranged interviews for the next morning, packed some books and notes into my briefcase, and headed home. As I unlocked my car, I heard a voice behind me. Hey! Doug Morrissey jogged up to me. I noticed his clean-shaven face and slimmer figure. Looks like the summer's been good to you, I said. He grinned. Time to get off my butt and make a go of it again. Sounds like a good plan, I said, trying to keep a pleasant smile but failing. His eyes narrowed. How are things with you? It's over, I said. Already? He asked, surprised. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. He nodded, his face clouding over. I got Kyle, I said. Joint custody, but he lives with me. You're kidding, Doug said. I shook my head. In the finances, I kept the house. Our incomes were close enough, so there's no alimony. I let her keep a hidden $401k, which is why there's no alimony. And the rest? 50, I said. He gave a bitter chuckle. Told you that lawyer Rebecca was good. She was. Thanks, really. I would have been clueless without her. She might be tough, but she knows her stuff, Doug acknowledged. She does, I agreed, nodding. Doug and I stood there thinking about what he had said. Looks like you're moving on, I finally said, looking him over. I met someone, he replied. Really? I asked, with more interest now. Yeah, she's great. Do I know her? I probed. He shrugged. Maybe. I laughed. This is like grade school. Should I pass her a note in homeroom? We'll see, he said, turning to leave. That was the first time I felt a bit of hope. Hope that things could get better and feel normal again. Doug's divorce had been tough, and he had been sad for a long time, but now he seemed like his old self again. Doug looked happy, lighthearted, and full of energy, much like he had been before the divorce. It was a good sign for me, too. It made me believe that someday I'd also get past the regret and bitterness and find happiness again. As I drove into my garage, I thought about how Doug didn't have to deal with raising a small child and a puppy alone. Heather Farley sat in front of me, looking very serious and professional in her navy blue pants and white blouse. She usually had a more carefree look, but she seemed ready for the serious talk. And what do you understand your duties to be? I asked. Research and memos, she answered. I need to research any topic you assign, then write a report covering the main points. Heather was sharp. She was much smarter and more mature than many of her peers. Jeremy Scott, who showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, was not as impressive. Have you spoken to past interns? I asked. Absolutely, she said confidently. And you could probably work for Professor Whitman, I suggested. I understand, she said, looking straight at me, but I don't want to work for him. He's the chair of the department, I pointed out. It would look good on your resume for graduate school. True, she said, but you're soon going to be the dean of history, so that won't matter. I leaned back, a bit surprised. And you know this how? She smiled slightly. I just know. Her confidence was surprising. No one had told me that Professor Whitman, who had been at Chadwick forever, was retiring. I thought he would stay there until he couldn't anymore. He was still in great shape both mentally and physically, much better than many younger professors. Heather spoke again. If you want to know, I'll tell you, but keep it between us, okay? I nodded. He told me, Professor Whitman himself. I had an interview with him yesterday. While he offered me a job, he suggested I meet you because this might be his last semester. He thinks you will take over." "Is he okay?" I asked, worried. "Is he sick?" "I don't know," she replied. "He seemed fine, same as always." "And he's already offered you a position?" I asked. "Sort of," she said. "It would mainly be sorting out his papers, nothing exciting. He said anyone could do it and that I should take the chance to learn more with you." I looked at her resume again. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for my response. "Fine. You're hired," I said. Her professional demeanor faded, and she looked thrilled, like a schoolgirl. Internships with top professors could greatly impact graduate school applications, so her excitement was understandable. "Thanks, Professor," she said. "You won't regret it." I decided to get her opinion on the other finalists. "Now, what do you think of Mr. Meeks and Mr. Scott?" "Meeks," she replied instantly. "Jeremy's smart, but he's lazy. Randy works hard and writes better. Jeremy tries to do as little as possible, but Randy will work hard." I nodded. That was exactly what I thought, too. Jeremy had never needed to try hard for his grades and didn't know how to put in extra effort. "Well, Miss Farley," I said, standing and offering my hand. "Welcome aboard." She shook my hand excitedly. "Thank you, Professor." "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "I need you here tomorrow morning at 8:30. "No problem," she said with a smile. "What will we work on?" "I don't know yet," I lied. "We'll figure it out in the morning." "Fair enough," she said, smiling brightly as she left. It was going to be a challenging semester watching her work. At 5:30 on Wednesday, the doorbell rang. "Your mom's here," I called to my child, then went to open the door. "Hi," Whitney said as she stepped inside. "Come on in," I said, feeling a bit awkward as she looked down, her voice low. She had dark circles under her eyes, her skin pale and her hair dull. "You okay?" I asked, lifting her chin gently. She looked up with a blank stare. "Sure." "You don't look so good," I said, glancing around the now half-empty living room. "Need some new furniture?" "Probably this weekend," she replied. "I'll go shopping while Kyle's with you." She paused, then nodded. "Hey, Mom!" Kyle shouted, running into the kitchen with little Sonny following close behind. "What's this?" she asked, hugging Kyle tightly. He squirmed in her grip, then grabbed the puppy. "He's Sun Tzu," Kyle said. "Isn't he great?" She looked at me, then back at Kyle and the puppy. "Sun Tzu, we call him Sonny." Kyle handed Sonny to Whitney, who held the little dog and smiled. "He's ugly," she said, laughing. "He's cool," Kyle insisted. "Really cool." She gave Sonny back to Kyle, who made faces at the dog, getting lots of happy licks. "So he finally got his dog," Whitney said, watching Kyle and Sonny. "It's helped," I said. "I see that," she replied. We watched a bit longer until the silence felt awkward. "You two better get going," I said. "Sure," she said, looking at me. "I'll have him back by 8 or so." "Okay," I said. "Come here, Kyle." He handed Sonny to me and took Whitney's hand. "What are we going to do?" he asked her as they walked out the door. I closed the door behind them. "What are we going to do?" I asked Sonny, looking into his bright eyes. Sonny barked, and I knew we needed to plan dinner. "Have either of you read this?" I asked Randy Meeks and Heather Farley, putting a book on my desk. Claudius by Robert Graves." They picked up their copies and read the back covers. "Never heard of it," Randy said, adjusting his glasses. "Me neither," Heather agreed. "It's about Claudius, a Roman emperor," I explained. "We're researching him?" Randy asked, looking puzzled. "No, not Claudius," I said. "I want you to read the book and tell me what we should research. Something new, something not covered much." "Based on this?" Heather asked, looking at the book. "Yes, read it all by Tuesday and give me your thoughts," I said. "Each of you, separately." "So, our own ideas?" Randy asked, not seeming annoyed. "Exactly, Mr. Meeks. Show me a new way to look at the change from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire." He glanced at Heather, who was already reading. "I'll leave you to it," I said, waving them off. Randy got up to leave, but Heather kept reading. "Miss Farley?" I said. She looked up. "Yes?" "You don't have to do it here," I suggested. "You can go to your dorm or somewhere else." She frowned. "If it's okay, I'd rather stay. My roommates are noisy." "The library?" I offered. She smiled. Here's fine. Randy looked at her, then at me before smiling and leaving. Tuesday by 3, he said as he walked out. My last meeting of the week was over, but still no news about Professor Whitman and the dean position. I kept quiet, not wanting to show that I suspected changes. You're still here? I asked when I got to my office. Heather had moved behind my desk and was writing notes. She didn't look up. Yes. I watched, impressed. She had read most of the book already and had lots of ideas. Can I have my desk back? I said, putting my briefcase in the chair she had used. Just a second, she said, finishing her note and underlining a word. Wow, she said, looking amazed. How have I never heard of this book before? Good question, I replied, looking at her notes. They were full of smart questions. It's a classic, I muttered. One of the best books of the 20th century. Wow, she said again, standing up and taking her notes. It's really inspiring, she said with a bright smile, to think that you could do something like this with something like that. Like what? She laughed. You're a history professor studying Roman history. I mean, come on. Is there anything more boring? Before I could answer, she hugged me tightly. This is going to be so much fun. I froze. I was scared of 3 things. First, that someone would walk in and I'd get in trouble. Second, that her hug might last too long and she would feel my reaction. Third, that her hug would end soon because, well, it felt nice. I cleared my throat and backed away from her to avoid the second fear. Fun. I agreed. She winked at me. Tons of fun, she said, then put her book and notes into a backpack. Same time tomorrow? I tried to find my voice but couldn't. She took my silence as a yes. Till then, she smiled. Bye. She walked out the door. Her walk was more eye-catching than it was yesterday. There was no doubt she knew her effect on me. Honestly, she had that effect on any guy, and she used it whenever she felt like it. I didn't really want to go back to the office the next day. Beautiful blonde or not, I got 2 spare keys for the office and left them with Sarah, the secretary. Early the next morning, with 4 days off because of the Labor Day weekend, I spent the morning searching online for furniture ideas. A few things were clear. First, I'm a guy, so I don't care if my furniture matches. Second, I'm a guy, so I don't know how to match furniture anyway. Third, I'm a guy, so buying furniture is something I avoid like the plague. Thank goodness for the internet. We have a few furniture stores in Grant City, including some in the mall. Instead of wasting hours shopping, I looked online first to make sure they were in stock and save time. 2 hours later, I knew I was in trouble. Apparently, furniture fabrics, styles, and colors are coded in a way that only women can understand. I speak 2 languages and can read in English, Spanish, Latin, and Greek, but I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. The pictures helped a little, but not much, so I gave up. Sun Tzu, my dog, was sleeping in his crate, his soft snores and yips comforting. I decided to check my email and then take a nap before Kyle got home. I had 4 emails. Heather and Randy both said they had finished reading I, Claudius, and would have their notes by Monday morning. I emailed them back saying Tuesday was soon enough. The 3rd email offered me a cheap deal on Viagra, which was a bit insulting. The 4th email was the most surprising. It was from Claude Law at Link TechNet and was titled Saturday. I clicked on it, not sure what to expect. I know you're still mad at me, it read, but I really wish we could move past that. What's done is done and we can't change it. Now that things have calmed down, though, I was wondering if you'd like to have a drink or maybe even dinner. There's no reason we can't still be friends, or more. And just like that, all the pain from the last 5 months came rushing back. I knew I'd see Whitney with other men eventually. We were both moving on. But this was different. This reminded me of the big question: what happened to my marriage? Reading the message again, I found no answers, but I had an email address to investigate if I wanted answers. I sat back, tense and unsure if I should look into it. Then I had another thought. How did this email come to my email? Actually, the email Whitney and I used to share. The answer hit me quickly. Whitney had opened a new email account with a name close to ours. I logged out and went through the process again. I typed Patterson 123 at Link Darknet and stared at it. Then I added a 4. Patterson 1234 at Link Darknet. I typed in my password. Any password would do, but I got invalid email address. I deleted the 4 and thought again. It had to be close to our real email. close enough that one extra letter or number or one less would send the email to our regular address. 5 minutes later, I figured it out. Patterson_123 at LinkDevNet. That little underline made all the difference. Now that I had a valid address, it was time to figure out the password. I tried everything. Her name, my name, Kyle's name, middle names, parents' names, maiden names. All the names with birth dates, social security numbers, anniversary dates, and old phone numbers. Nothing worked. The message was the same every time. Invalid password. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Almost 3. Carl would be home soon. My eyes wandered to a small brass nameplate, the paperweight I had gotten for Whitney when she won her first trial. Super lawyer. I remembered giving it to her and recalled her excitement as she placed it right in the middle of her desk all those years ago. Now it was dusty and forgotten on a shelf in the corner of my den. I wondered how long it had been there. How long since she had brought it back from her office. I turned back to the screen. I typed super lawyer, then tried again in all lowercase letters, and finally, I was in. One click on the history of undeleted messages, and I saw a list going back 11 months. "Dad," Carl called from the front door, closing it behind him. "In the den," I replied, highlighting the entire list and clicking print all. "Hey, Dad," he said, rushing into the room and heading straight for the crate. "Hey, son." The pup was already up, barking happily at Carl, his tail wagging fast. "Come on," he said, opening the crate and running back out of the den with Sonny chasing after him. I looked at the printing emails, then back to the screen. I clicked on a message dated March 19th, 2010, the night Carl and I stayed up eating pizza and watching movies. Whitney was silent on the couch that whole time. That evening, a few hours after I told her I wanted a divorce. "I know this is tough for you," he wrote to her. "You've been so unhappy for so long and now you're feeling guilty and sad. Sad about the state of your marriage. Guilty because your little boy will go through this. I wanted more than anything to hold you today, hug you, and comfort you. I understand your confusion and how torn you feel about leaving him. But remember how happy we will be together. You, Carl, and me. I want that more than anything, and I know you do too. We will be the happiest family when that day comes." I thought she had met him that day, but it wasn't clear if they had done anything. The email hinted they had been close, though. I read her reply, dated the next morning. "He told me yesterday that it's over," she wrote. "Luke is divorcing me. We are telling Carl today. I don't know what to do. Last night we ate pizza and watched movies until Carl fell asleep on Luke's lap. They looked so peaceful and content. Watching them, I realized something important. You and I don't have what Luke and I have. We never will. I don't know what I've been doing for the past 2 months, but it stops now. I don't want to see you again." "Dad?" Carl said from the doorway. I looked up. "What's wrong?" he asked. I tried to smile. "Nothing, little man." I exited the email and gathered the thick stack of printed messages. "Just let me put this away and I'll come out and play with you and Sonny, okay?" His face lit up. "Hurry," he said, running back outside. I locked the emails in a drawer, then went out to the backyard where Carl and his friends were playing with Sonny. The pup looked overwhelmed by the attention from 5 excited kids, but was clearly enjoying it. "It was a good idea, Doc," Sally said from behind me. "It's really taken his mind off things." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "It will all get better, you know. It will take some time, but it will." I put my hand over hers. "Thanks." "No problem," she said, giving me a cold can of beer. "Now come on, it's Friday night." We both drank our beers and chatted while watching the kids play with Sonny. "Did you feed him yet?" Whitney asked, carrying Carl's bag a little after 6. "No. I thought you'd want to take him out or something." "Probably just something quiet back at the apartment," she said. "It's been a long week." "Tell me about it. Classes start next week." I nodded, not wanting small talk with her. She knew that classes always started right after Labor Day, and she knew Carl hadn't eaten because he'd asked her where they were going the second she walked in. "No furniture yet?" she said, looking around the great room and kitchen. "This weekend," I replied. She gave a small smile. "That's right. You told me that." Carl came back into the room, stopping at the couch before reaching us. Sonny was lying tired on the couch, still panting from play. "Sonny," Carl said as he petted the dog and kissed his muzzle, then ran over to hug me. "Have a good weekend, Dad," he said, squeezing me tight. "I love you." "I love you too," I said. He took Whitney's hand and she led him to the door. "Have a good weekend, Luke," Whitney said. "You too," I replied. Then, bitterness rising, I added, "Super lawyer." She froze, then looked back at me for a moment. The look on my face must have confirmed her worst fears because she sagged, nodded, and led Carl to her car. 4 years and 3 months later, I knew a few things. First, Whitney had lied. She had been with him at least 6 times. Second, he was a lawyer with an email address from sealed.law@link.net. near Sherman Oaks. There was a law firm called Cahill, Levine, and Don Levy. The firm had 9 lawyers, 7 of them men. Their website didn't list an email address. He pursued her persistently, and after months, Whitney finally accepted his advances. Even though he asked her many times, she never got back together with him after her email on March 26th. Except for his occasional comments about how I didn't care for her feelings and dreams, I couldn't figure out what I did wrong. None of Whitney's emails had anything bad to say about me. In fact, I felt like an afterthought in all her emails, except for one on March 20th, where I seemed like a happy memory, similar to recalling a joyful Christmas from childhood. There were still things I didn't know. Who was this guy? Neither of them signed their messages. How did this start? Yes, he chased her, but I didn't know if she indicated she was available or interested. When did I go from being Whitney's beloved husband to just a fond memory? When did she stop loving me and why? What did I do wrong? It was almost 11 and I was ready for bed. Then I got an idea and decided to check it out. I logged into the secret email account and looked at the history. All the emails were deleted except for one unopened message. The subject line simply read, "Luke, I'm so sorry." I left the message unopened, turned off the internet, and went to bed. Let her wonder if I'd read them. By 9:30 Saturday morning, I was incredibly bored. My pug, Sun Tzu, had already been walked around the block multiple times, and it felt like we'd covered 11 miles. I had already read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. My breakfast of grapefruit and toast took just 10 minutes, and I had nothing to do until the stores opened at 10. "Let's go to the park," I said to Sun Tzu. He tried his best to ignore me. "I'll carry you," I promised. Finally catching him, I carried him under one arm with his little cage in the other hand. He seemed a bit happier when I placed his cage on the passenger seat. With him in the cage, I got into the driver's side. Once the car was moving, Sun Tzu was already snoring. 5 minutes later, I parked at Veterans Park. Some people were jogging on the paths, and a few mothers were pushing children on the swings. I woke Sun Tzu and held him in my arms. We took a slow walk around the park. Sun Tzu was happy to lie in my arms and give sleepy looks to joggers. It was a warm morning and the walk felt good. It felt better than sitting in my living room staring at the walls. As we got closer to the swings and the sound of children playing, Sun Tzu's ears perked up. He began looking around for the children. When he saw them, he started yipping and his tiny tail wagged quickly against my chest. I smiled at him and then saw her. She noticed me at the same time and I stopped in my tracks. "Hey!" Kristen called, waving while she pushed a little boy on the swing. I nodded in greeting, watching her for a moment. She looked comfortable and happy, enjoying pushing the child. I admired her calmness and joy. After a minute, the little boy jumped off the swing, landed in the grass, and smiled at me. "Can I see your puppy, mister?" he asked, grinning. "Sure," I said, bending down to let Sun Tzu out. "Come here, boy," the boy said. "His name's Sun Tzu," I said. The boy petted the dog, who clearly enjoyed the boy's company more than mine that morning. Kristen came closer, saying, "What's that saying? Something about snails and puppy dog tails? That's what little boys are made of." "I don't remember," I said. "Me neither," she replied. "Are you alone this weekend?" I nodded. "First time," she smiled sympathetically. "It takes some getting used to." "Yeah, I'm noticing," I said. She bent down to pet Sun Tzu, who preferred the boy's playful attention. "Is this 2 Saturdays in a row, Luke? Are you stalking me?" "Just killing time until the stores open," I mumbled, then decided to change the subject. "Your son's name?" "Ben," she replied while watching him closely. So you're in the same boat as me? I asked. She nodded and said, pretty much. But at least it's your weekend, right? I asked. She shook her head. I'm dropping him off at his dad's in about 20 minutes. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. She was beautiful and kind. I wanted to get to know her better, given my loneliness. So, what are your plans for the rest of the weekend? She asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. Furniture shopping? I said. Really? A man furniture shopping? She chuckled. I'd pay to see that. Really? Like lunch? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She looked slightly surprised. Was that too forward? I stammered. She smiled again. So you're asking for help in furniture shopping and in return, lunch on you? Before I could reply, she said, Okay, Professor. Sounds like a plan. I'll buy the lunch, I offered. She shook her head. Nope. You called me out when I said something. Fair is fair. She was a woman of her word. I smiled, happy to have her company on what would have been a lonely and sad day. So where do you live? She asked. Winston Hill, house number 715. She checked her watch, then looked at Ben and Sun Tzu. Okay, how about I take Ben to his dad's house, then meet you at your place in about half an hour? I'll take a quick look around your house, get an idea of what you need and what style, and then we can go shopping. Sounds good. I agreed, wondering how much time I'd have to clean up before she arrived. 30 minutes, she said, reaching out for Ben. Come on, honey, time to get you to Dad's. I picked up the pug and followed them to the parking lot. The house wasn't as clean as a soldier's quarters, but it was fine for most people. You're right, Kristen said, leaning against the doorway and looking into my empty bedroom. It's really bare. You definitely need furniture. She turned and looked at me. Where do you sleep? On the sofa in the den, I said. It's a hide-a-bed. That must be cozy. She snorted. Let's go. 3 hours later, our furniture shopping was almost done. Despite my fears, Kristen's picks for me, I say picks because I really didn't have much say, were tasteful and manly. No floral prints. Most things were brown or burgundy. Okay, she said as we left the Lazy Boy store. We've got recliners, an entertainment center, dresser, coffee tables, and end tables out of the way. Just the bed left. Want to go to Burgers? I asked. No, let's try Sleep Comfort, she said. Expensive, but worth it. So off we went to look at beds, something I'd never heard about. Lie on this one, she said, sprawling across one side of a king-sized bed. I sprawled on the other side. Comfy, but a bit soft. Then watch this, the sales lady said and pressed a button on a remote. I heard a whirring sound, and a minute later the bed was as hard as a rock. Cool? Kristen asked, her face lighting up. Very. I agreed, but it's king size. Can't I go smaller? Not a chance, she insisted. Then she softened. You're going to find someone else, Luke. You really will. I nodded. Then her grin came back. And when you do, you don't want her hogging all the bed space. Right. I grinned back. Right. He'll take it, Kristen said, hopping off the bed. I laid there for a moment, wishing for the smaller bed, but only if Kristen were in it and it was small enough so she'd be close to me. You'll need a headboard, she said. This comes with a frame, but you'll need a headboard. You can buy one or have someone make it, the sales lady suggested. Kristen shook her head. Tyler's dad still does woodworking. He can build you one that'll be ready by the time this is delivered. Tyler's dad? I asked. My father-in-law. He's made a few, so he knows the size. I nodded. Fair enough. We spent the next 10 minutes doing the paperwork. Before long, we were standing in the mall hallway with people rushing by. We were done. My house pretty much furnished in just over 3 hours. Lunch? I suggested. Something light, she said. I'll buy. No, it's on me, I assured her. It's not about money, I'm just not that hungry. Me neither. Still, if we don't eat something, we'll be starving later. Kristen looked me up and down, then grinned and linked her arm with mine. Come on, hero man, she said, pulling me along. I think I know just the place. 15 minutes later, we parked outside a small bakery on the main street of Grant City. How have I never noticed this place before? I asked, getting out of the car. You're not from here, she said, leading me inside the tiny bakery. It's a local secret. A plump woman with steel gray hair, nice glasses, and a white smock with matching apron smiled and leaned towards us from behind the counter as we approached. 5 minutes later, we were at a small table in the corner, nibbling on fresh croissants and sipping hot coffee. How did I miss this place? Kristen grinned. I told you, you have to grow up here to know these little spots. So why don't you tell me about yourself? I asked, looking down as I spoke. What do you want to know? I looked up to meet her eyes. She was smiling. Well, I know you're a teacher and you've got a little boy, Ben. I know you were married to the writer, Tyler Collins. Yes, Tyler Collins was my first husband. My second husband was a cop, but it didn't last long. Ben is Tyler's son. Randy, the cop, and I didn't have kids. She snorted. That marriage didn't even last long enough to open all the wedding gifts. Over the next half hour, while we walked down the main street, Kristen told me about her past. 2 husbands, loneliness, and how she left Tyler in Florida, moved back to Illinois, married Randy, got dumped by Randy, asked Tyler for another chance, started teaching, got turned down by Tyler, who married his editor, and has spent the past 5 years raising her son and going on the occasional date. Questions? She asked softly when she finished. I stopped and turned to look at her. This isn't an interrogation, Kristen. I know, it's just that I've made some really big mistakes. Mistakes that hurt a lot of people. Not just Tyler and Randy. Ben, too, and Tyler's parents, my parents, and my cousin. A lot of people. Did you do it to hurt them? On purpose? She shrugged. It doesn't really matter, does it? The point is, I hurt them. They all suffered because of me. Why I did it doesn't matter. Just that I did it. And you don't think they share any of the blame? You think Tyler and especially Randy aren't at fault? Tyler? Maybe a little. Not really, though. I put him in a tough spot, Randy. Quite a bit more. But still, none of it would have happened without me. If I'd been thinking straight, maybe I wouldn't have done it, but honestly, I think I would have still done it. She shook her head. Not a chance. So what's different now? I asked. She was surprised by my question. That's all. She started walking again. Of course, that's all, Luke. Come on. You've got Kyle. You think you'd ever do all that if it meant putting him through all of that again? If he'd have to go through a second divorce with you? I didn't even want him to go through the first divorce. No, she said, her voice matching mine. If I'd known I was pregnant, I'd have never left. I'd have told Tyler the truth and begged for forgiveness. I'd have spent my life trying to keep my family together. You think he'd have forgiven you? I don't know, she said. I'd like to think he would have. He was always a great guy. Still is. You sound like you're still in love with him. Sure, why not? He's Ben's father and he's a great guy, but he's moved on. He's got a new wife now and they've got a little girl. So yeah, I still love him, but it's a comfortable love. Not a burning passion, I gave that up. Our ship sailed, and even if it came back, I couldn't get on again. I was quiet and she didn't say anything else until we were in the car, driving back to my place. Penny for your thoughts, she said. I don't know, I replied, eyes on the road. I can't help thinking that maybe Whitney, my ex, didn't think this all through. I don't know, Kristen said, putting her hand on my arm. Sounds like she changed her mind toward the end. Maybe she wanted to do what I wish I'd had the chance to do, beg for your forgiveness and try to make things right. I shot a glance at Kristen, then back to the road. Just one thing missing, I said. I know she didn't want to tell the whole truth in the process. That's the problem. We pulled into the driveway beside her car and I turned off the engine. Luke. Kristen. If she'd been honest from the start, would you have forgiven her? I thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. Guess we'll never know. I'd asked Kristen to dinner, but she had plans with her family. She promised to call me the next day, and I told her I'd be there. So, my first Saturday night alone was spent feeding the dog and eating soup. I watched 5 episodes of Band of Brothers, put the pup in his crate, and fell asleep on the couch. One of the worst parts of getting old is not being able to sleep for long. As a teen, I slept in till almost 11. At West Point, I was up by 4:30 every morning. After the Army, I enjoyed sleeping until 8 or 9 most weekends and got 8 hours of sleep every night. Now, when I needed to sleep to fill the empty time, I couldn't. So there I was at 5:30, walking a grumpy puppy around the block. During our 5th trip, an old man in pajamas and a bathrobe was waiting on his porch. "You shouldn't do that," he called. I stopped and turned to him. "Do what?" He nodded at the wheezing puppy. "Walk him so much or so fast. He's a pug. And you know this how?" He smiled patiently. "Because it's what I do. I'm a vet." I looked down at the puppy and then back at the man, scooping the dog into my arms. I walked to the front porch. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to be rude." He looked at me, then at the dog, now snug in my chest. "Alan Lacroix," he said, petting the puppy. He was about 70, tall and thin, bald with a gray ring of hair and reading glasses. His arms looked strong for his age. "Luke Patterson," I responded. "Pugs have a shortened, soft palate," he explained, looking at me, "so they're not good at breathing. They snore, wheeze, and pant a lot. Especially in hot weather, they get tired and overheated easily. So keep an eye on him in this weather, make sure he gets plenty of water when you get him home, and check his paw pads. They're probably swollen." "I saw them, but I only walked him 4 times around the block today," he said. "I know," I counted. "You walked him for nearly an hour yesterday, maybe 2.5, maybe 3 miles. You watched me?" I saw that too while I read near the front window. "You'll kill him, son. Sure thing, you keep it up and you'll hurt him or worse." I nodded, scared of what nearly happened. "I didn't know." He smiled. "Most first-time pet owners don't. Someone should have told you, but they didn't, so I'm telling you now." He scratched Sonny behind the ears. "First thing when you get him home and you should carry him, see how he's panting? He can't stop." He was panting, but he was also looking at me with loving eyes, and to my shame, he trusted me. "I promise," I said. "Okay, Luke Patterson, just thought you should know." "How do you know I'm a first-time pet owner?" He chuckled. "Because you're letting the dog walk you instead of the other way around. Next time, keep him close to you. If he pulls ahead, tug him back. You got a harness so you won't hurt him. You'll just show him who's in charge." He laughed again, waved, and went back inside. I headed home, got Sonny a big bowl of cold water, and put it down. He drank almost half the bowl quickly and his panting slowed. "Sorry, boy," I said, petting him. He wagged his tail, then went and lay down in the living room. On the other hand, spent the next hour trying to calm down. How would I explain to Carl if Sonny got hurt or worse? As if enough stuff wasn't going wrong in his life. I almost killed his dog. I decided to go grocery shopping. You know you're bored when grocery shopping seems exciting. I was in the produce section when I heard a familiar voice. "You, Heather Farley said, grabbing the zucchini from my hands. "Don't buy that, Professor. It's gross." I looked at her and laughed. "Good morning, Miss Farley." She smiled brightly, as did the shorter brunette next to her. "Morning, Professor Patterson," she said in a teasing tone. "Okay, fine. We're not in class. Call me Luke, and you'll call me Heather," she said. "And me?" "Brandy," the other girl said. "Fair enough." I turned back to the zucchini. "So what's wrong with zucchini?" "Not zucchini," Heather said. "Just that zucchini." "Okay, what's wrong with that zucchini?" She looked at me like I was hopeless. "It's bad. Full of chemicals picked too soon, made to ripen with gases, and who knows how old. Get it?" "Okay, and my alternative is—" "Dude," Brandy chimed in, "look around. You're in farm country. Drive a few miles and you'll find farm stands. It'll be fresher and taste better." I looked from Brandy to Heather and back again. These girls seem to love talking about food. "Melons are in season," Heather said, giving me a look. "Same farm stands, and you can get meat there too." Heather looked at Brandy and they nodded together. "Sure, you can buy your meat here, not your bread, though. There's this bakery on Winstead Street. You know it?" I nodded. "Just went there yesterday." They nodded knowingly. "That's the best spot." "Come on," Heather said. "Follow us. We'll help." "I'm pretty sure I can handle it," I protested. "Yeah, right." Brandy laughed, rolling her eyes at Heather, who did the same in return. So I spent the next half hour following them around the store, buying mostly milk, coffee, pasta, meat, and frozen veggies, but only if they were out of season. Strangely, it was fun. Heather and Brandy chatted nonstop about classes, teachers, and other stuff. After we went through the checkout and out to the parking lot, Heather turned to me. "So, want to follow us to some farm stands?" I smiled. "No thanks. I'm pretty sure I can handle it this time." Heather batted her eyes at me. "What's wrong, Professor? Afraid of being alone with us too long?" "Yeah, Professor," Brandy joined in, putting an arm around Heather. "Don't think you can handle it?" I felt my face get red, half from embarrassment and half from sudden excitement. I tried to say something, but they both started laughing. "Okay then," Heather said, grinning. But if you change your mind, you've got my email. I barely managed to wave. An hour later, with fresh bread, croissants, and some veggies from a farm stand, I was back in my kitchen unloading my groceries. There were no messages, and I felt a bit disappointed. Then the phone rang as I finished putting the groceries away. I answered. Hello? There was silence. Then Whitney spoke. Oh, you were expecting someone? I sighed. Yes, sort of. What's up, Whitney? I was wondering if I could bring Kyle back today instead of tomorrow, like we planned. Something wrong? She hesitated, then answered. Well, he's pretty bored and he misses his puppy, and I have a big trial starting Tuesday, so I need to start getting ready. I thought about it, wondering if this would ruin any plans Kristen might have for Luke. Sorry, I said. When were you thinking of bringing him back? Now. I looked at the clock. It wasn't even 11 yet. Sure, whenever you want. I'll be here. Thanks, Luke, she said. Then, after a slight pause, added, I hope I'm not messing up any plans for you. I'll deal with it, I said. See you soon. I hung up without saying goodbye. No, I love you. Just hung up the phone. Kristen called after Whitney dropped Kyle off. He was in the backyard with Sonny when the phone rang. Hello? Morning, Luke. Kristen said good morning. Do you have plans today? I sighed. Whitney brought Kyle back early. She laughed. Welcome to it. Better get used to it now. Does this happen to you a lot? No, she said. Not a lot. Sometimes, though. And sometimes I use Tyler as a babysitter if I have a date. I thought about that, wondering how often she had dates. Are you there? She asked. Yeah, still here? Do you want to get out of the house today? Got something in mind? I do, she said. Can you handle being around my ex-husband and his new wife? Say again? She laughed. Tyler invited me to his house for a cookout, a Labor Day party. I mentioned I might bring a date, and he said okay. Yeah, I said. But Kyle can come too, right? Ben will be there along with a lot of other kids. Tyler has a pool they can play in. You won't feel out of place. No, she said. It doesn't happen often, but enough that everyone's comfortable. We're not best friends, but we get along for Ben's sake. We still have many mutual friends, so it's not so awkward anymore. I looked out at Kyle. Sonny needed a nap. I had nothing better to do. Okay. And I wanted to see Kristen in a swimsuit. Should I bring swim trunks? She laughed. If you want to swim, are you bringing a swimsuit? I guess you'll find out, won't you? An hour later, swim trunks and towels for Kyle and me in a duffel bag. We picked up Kristen in front of a small, neat house with perfect landscaping. She opened the door before I could ring the bell. Come in for a second, she said. You can help me carry some stuff. Was I supposed to bring something? I asked, following her through a neat living room into a small kitchen. She wore shorts and a sleeveless blouse, and I noticed her toned legs. Not really, she said, unplugging a crock pot and nodding for me to take it. If you want, we can stop on the way and you can get some beer or soda. Fair enough, I agreed. She grabbed a bag and her purse. Sorry, no time for a tour now. Maybe next time. Sure, looking around one last time before following her out. It's nice, though. Yeah, she said. Cozy. Who does your yard work? I asked as she opened the back door to my car, and she and Kyle greeted each other. No one, she said, putting her things down before taking the crock pot from me and placing it on the floor. I do it myself. Keeps me busy when Ben's with his dad. It's nice, I said, opening her door. Thanks, she said, smiling and buckling up. An hour later, I'd met most of the 20 or so adults at the party. Tyler Collins and his wife, Marissa, were pleasant. Their home was pretty, not large, and sat well off the road on a 5-acre plot surrounded by oak trees. And you were in the Army, Tyler said. I nodded. Got out in 92. What did you do? Marissa asked. She was pretty in a tall, slim way with a sly smile. She didn't speak much, but was direct when she did. Infantry, I said. Platoon leader. She nodded and Kristen spoke up. Kyle told his class he's some kind of war hero. Tyler raised an eyebrow. War hero? Forgot to duck, I said. That Kuwait and Iraq thing. Desert Storm. That's the one, I confirmed. Gulf War. Did you see battle? Marissa asked. I paused, then nodded. And you did something heroic? No more than I was supposed to. Marissa's sly smile returned. Are we going to have to torture you for the story? I felt their stares, knowing they wanted a tale of heroism, but they wouldn't understand. None of them had been there. Marissa sensed my hesitation and let me off the hook. "You could learn something, Tyler," she said, still looking at me. "And what's that, dear?" "Mystery is good, but I write mysteries." "I mean in a person," she said. "Sometimes it's best to keep certain things to yourself." He laughed. "And I'm what? An open book?" I watched them, worried, but her sly smile now turned on him, with a softness that showed love. His confidence in receiving that look showed his trust. "Not in you, Tyler, in your characters. Hold some things back. Let readers wonder. Don't reveal all at the end." He nodded, looking from Marissa to Kristen to me, then grinned. "My harshest critic." "So," Kristen said in the lull, "is anyone going into the pool?" "Are you?" Marissa asked me. When I hesitated, Kristen grinned. "I'm only going in if you're going in." I looked at Tyler and Marissa, both with grins, then back to Kristen. I really wanted to see her in that swimsuit. We were going to be at least friends, so I was only delaying the inevitable. "Where do I change?" I asked. "Follow me," Kristen answered, taking my hand and smiling. "If you're not out in 5 minutes," Tyler said, grinning and raising his eyebrows. "He wishes," Kristen said to Tyler with a snort. "He can use Ben's room. I'll use the hallway bathroom." "Spoil sport," Marissa teased. 5 minutes later, with a towel wrapped around my waist, I walked back to the backyard. "You have the widest legs I've ever seen," Kristen said. "Like a ghost," someone next to Tyler replied. "Why the towel?" Marissa asked. "You wearing Speedos or something?" I looked around at them and then took the towel away from my waist. They tried not to look shocked, but they couldn't hide their surprise. "Like I said," I explained, looking down at the scars running from my right hip almost to my knee. "I forgot to duck." Kristen came closer and reached out to touch the scars above my swimsuit. "I'd rather you not do that just now," I said softly. The tension broke and everyone laughed. Tyler offered to let us go back inside, while others suggested we use a corner of the pool away from the children. Kristen seemed fine with it, but I was starting to blush. "Oh, look," Tyler laughed. "Looks like someone's got a crush." "Tyler," Marissa warned with a look. "Sorry," he said, still chuckling. "Go on, you two. Keep an eye on the kids for a while and we'll start grilling." "Sure you don't want some help?" I asked. He shook his head. "Positive. Just go have some fun." After a half hour in the pool, mostly avoiding being splashed or jumped on by lots of kids, Kristen and I sat on the edge with our feet in the water. "Does it hurt?" she asked, watching the kids. "No, the warm water actually feels good," I said. "Is that why Kyle says you're a war hero?" "No," I replied, looking at her. She filled out her swimsuit well. "His mom told him that when he first saw the scars. That's what she told him." "Does he know what it's from?" she asked. "He knows as much as you," I said. "Does anyone else? Besides Whitney, of course, and maybe your parents and whoever was there when it happened?" "Nope. You know about as much as anyone. I never told my parents." Understanding now how quiet I was about it, she hesitated with her next question. "So, am I what? A hero?" "Tough to define, don't you think?" She looked at me closely. "Did the Army say you were?" I stared back, then nodded. "Yeah, I got a medal for it. Medals, if you count the Purple Heart." "Which one did you get?" "Silver Star," I shrugged. "Third highest one they give out." She smiled and raised an eyebrow. "So I guess you really are a hero then?" I chuckled. "No, like I said, just too stupid to duck." I watched her face move closer and froze, eyes wide. She kissed me. It wasn't a deep kiss. Not really a romantic kiss. Just a light touch of her lips on mine. Whatever you call it, it felt like a spark and ended before I could kiss her back. Then reality hit and I looked around. No one else had seen it, not even Kyle. "Don't worry," she whispered. "He wasn't looking." I smiled, glad she understood and didn't think I was rejecting her. "Always wanted to kiss a hero, Luke Patterson," she said. I felt a thrill in my belly, a lightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. "That's all you ever wanted to try with a hero?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Her grin turned playful. "Maybe if it's the right hero, you know, not just any old hero." "So there are a lot of those around here to pick from, heroes, that is," I joked. She laughed. "Good point." By 6:30, I began to worry about little son Sue. Sure, he'd sleep most of the day when Kyle wasn't around, but he still needed to eat. Plus, after eating a lot of chicken, coleslaw, beans, and potato salad, I was ready to relax. "But Dad," Kyle protested, "Ben wants me to spend the night." I looked at Kristen, who shrugged. Just then, Marissa came over. "Sorry, you were asked a couple of hours ago, and it's okay with us if it's okay with you." I looked from her to Kyle, then to little Ben standing not far away, and back to Marissa. "Okay, I didn't know them well, but how dangerous can two writers be?" "You're sure it's not a problem?" She smiled. "Really, Ben wants him to stay, and we've got plenty of room." "What time should I pick him up tomorrow?" I asked. Kyle cheered, and Ben pumped his fist. Kristen laughed, and Marissa grinned. "We'll drop him off at your place probably around noon." "Thanks," I said. She waved it off before giving me a hug and thanking me for coming. I spent 5 minutes lecturing Kyle on manners and being on his best behavior, just like my parents always did when I stayed at someone's house for the first time. He spent those 5 minutes rolling his eyes and waiting for me to finish so he could get back in the pool. Most of the drive back to town was spent in a comfortable silence. It became even more comfortable when Kristen grabbed my free hand and put it on her knee. I shot her a look, but she just stared ahead with a smile. "So, you want to get a drink somewhere before you drop me off?" she asked. "Sounds nice," I replied. "Can I drop by the house and feed Sonny first and let him out of his cage for a few minutes?" "Sure." 5 minutes later, Sonny was out of his cage, running around the backyard. He sniffed every bit of grass before marking it. "Got a beer?" Kristen asked me from the deck. "Sure," I replied. I went to the fridge, grabbed a couple of Amstel light beers, opened them, and handed one to her. She took a long sip. "Something wrong?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just working up some courage." "For what?" I asked. She giggled after taking another sip, then burped. "Sorry." I chuckled and had a sip of my beer. "Do you need some courage too?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet. If you need some, maybe I should get ready too." "Oh, really?" She put her beer on the railing and turned to face me, looking at my bottle. "Does this mean what I think it means?" I asked, putting my bottle down. She nodded and stepped closer, then kissed me. This was no light kiss. It was gentle but real, her hands in my hair while my hands settled on her back. We just enjoyed the moment. After a minute, she pulled away and looked at me. "Thanks." "I think I should thank you," I murmured. "It was nice, really nice." She smiled a happy smile. "So, did I pass the test?" I asked. Her eyes searched my face. She then gave me a peck on the cheek. "It's not a test. It's something I've wanted to do since last week." "And why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't sure if I liked you enough. Remember what I said?" I nodded. "We have kids now. We shouldn't rush into things that might hurt them." I nodded again, happy she understood. "Sorry if you want more now, but I can't risk that. Sleeping together too soon makes things messy," she said. "It can make people possessive," I added, "and a bit too appreciative too soon." "Meaning?" "Meaning if we rush, you'll just be the rebound, which neither of us wants." She thought about that and then smiled a bit. "Did I say something wrong?" I asked. She turned and smiled. "No, Luke, nothing wrong." Her smile seemed forced, and I tried to ease her worries. "Listen," I whispered. "Just because you're the first since my divorce, it doesn't mean you'll just be a rebound. If we take it slow and it works out, we can become best friends before anything more. If it doesn't work, it won't be because of a rebound or anything like that." Her eyes sparkled with tears, but her smile told me I said the right thing. "You're so smart. No wonder you're a professor," she said, before kissing me again. This kiss lasted longer until Sonny barked at us. "Ouch," I said as Sonny nipped my ankle. She laughed and picked up her beer. "Let's feed him and then have that drink," she suggested. "Good plan," I agreed. The next morning at 11:30, Kyle rushed in and headed straight for Sonny. Sonny was just as happy to see his brother, and they ran out to the backyard together. "Hello?" I heard someone call. Walking from the kitchen to the living room, I saw Tyler Collins at the door. "Just making sure someone was home," he said. "Come on in. Have a beer or a soda or something." Tyler smiled, came in, and closed the door. "Did he behave?" I asked. "Sure," Tyler replied. "They had fun. He might need a nap, though. They didn't sleep until almost midnight." I laughed. "The joys of sleepovers. What can I get you?" I asked, opening the fridge. "Just a Diet Pepsi, please." I handed him one. He opened it, took a drink, and leaned against the counter. "What's it like being a best-selling author?" I asked. "Busier than you'd think. There's writing, editing, more editing, then the story idea and research. Plus, movie scripts, book tours, talk shows, and all that stuff," he explained. "Sounds hectic," I said. "Way more than I ever thought," he agreed. He took another sip and then asked, "And you? Being a history professor? 9 hours a week in class, about 18 hours preparing and grading, 9 more for office hours and a few faculty meetings. That's not too bad," I said. "But there's also research and writing for journals, usually with student help. Maybe 15 more hours a week," I added. "Okay," he said with a smile. "That sounds pretty busy too." I shrugged. "It's not so bad. I can do most of my work from home. I can prepare, write, and do other stuff whenever I want." He looked at me, listened, and saw the look on my face. He finished my thought and said, "Yeah, that's how I started writing too." I thought about my next question, but he saw my look and smiled. "So you and Kristen are friends for now at least?" "Good idea," he said when I told him my plan. "When Kristen left me, I was lost. So you think I should take things slow, get to know each other, talk a lot. Talk about what you each want and like and all the little things that can become big problems?" "Sure." I took a sip of my drink, unsure what to say next. Tyler's face was open, so I decided to be honest. "She told me what happened with you." He nodded. "It was bad, but she says she's changed and won't do it again." He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "Did she say why? That she couldn't do that to Ben again?" He nodded. "That explains a lot." "Like what?" "Like her life after Randy divorced her." He finished his drink, put the empty can in the sink upside down, and crossed his arms. "She was selfish, Luke. Sorry, but it's true. But since her second divorce, she hardly dates. This town is big, but not that big. Ben tells us almost every time she has a date. We're not prying, but we usually babysit when she goes out. So we know, and we all hang out in the same places. So we'd know if she had lots of boyfriends, but she hasn't been like that. Almost like she's scared. And you think?" He smiled. "I'd like to say she's been waiting for me. Her lost love. But that's not true. That would have stopped once Marissa and I got married. Then we thought she just didn't want to be known as a bad person. Now her reason makes sense, a lot of sense." He patted me on the shoulder. "I think it means she isn't as selfish as she was. I think it means she's changed and has her priorities straight now." I couldn't look at him when I asked the next question, both from embarrassment and fear of the answer. "Do you know if she's seeing anyone else?" "I'm sure she isn't. He told me all about her and Allison taking you out to get a dog. He said that was the first time she mentioned another man or seemed happy about meeting one in a long time, maybe almost a year. And he notices these things. He's protective, I guess. I think he wonders why she's not with someone, just like I do." I nodded, thinking about his words. "Still," he continued, "you gotta wonder. About what?" He raised an eyebrow. "She's known you for, what, a few weeks?" I nodded. "And you two left together last night, right?" "Right. And you spent the night together?" "Right." I shook my head sadly. 2 kisses, good kisses, great kisses. Still just 2 kisses. A beer here, 2 beers at the bar, and then home to our own beds by 10. He looked shocked. "Not even more than a few kisses?" I laughed. "Tell me about it." He was still laughing when he left a few moments later. Having Kyle back after only 3 days reminded me how much busier I was around the house when he wasn't with Whitney. It also reminded me how much happier and less alone I felt. It was fun spending the afternoon making models of Russian tanks and soldiers in the basement and painting the cool metal pieces. It's clear why the father-son bond is so important. "Okay," I said to Heather and Randy, who were waiting in my office just before 8 on Tuesday morning. "What do you have for me?" Randy looked at Heather, who nodded. She reached into her backpack and handed me a neatly typed note. "And yours?" I asked Randy. He wouldn't look at me, but Heather spoke for him. "We did it together. I met him Sunday night and we went over our notes. Our ideas were similar, so we put them together into one note for you." I looked from her to him, then at the note. "That true, Randy?" "Yes," he stammered. "And this one note has all of your ideas, the ones you each had?" "Yes," he croaked. I looked at Heather. Why did you decide to do it this way? She shrugged, not bothered at all by my calm tone. Why should you read basically the same thing twice? Time is money, you know. And this way you get all the ideas and only have to read once. And we made the ideas more detailed working together, Randy added. I looked at them both for a long time. In the past, I had interns who did this to split the work or switch back and forth, doing half the work for full credit. That didn't seem to be the case here. Okay, I said, tossing the note aside. Then tell me what you two think is the best idea for a new way to look at this period in Roman history. We'll do better than that, Heather said, almost bouncing with excitement. We even have a title. It's good enough for a book, too. I raised my eyebrows. Then don't keep me waiting. Was empire inevitable? She said, holding my hand up for Heather to be quiet so Randy could answer. He cleared his throat. Meaning, did the Roman Republic have to end? How many steps along the way could have changed things? Here's the simplified narrative storytelling version of the provided text, with any sexually suggestive content removed. Little things and big things could have ended the brief rule Julius Caesar started. Octavian made it strong. Why did it continue after Octavian? After Caesar Augustus died? I thought about it. Not a new idea, but there are many ways to look at it. That's it? I asked. No, Heather answered, before I could stop her. We compare it to a more modern switch from a republic to a dictatorship to show how history repeats itself. Okay, Heather, I'll listen. Which modern switch do we use? America. She smiled proudly. Us? The United States? Her head nodded so hard I thought her teeth might fly out. Sure, we're not all the way there yet. Still, look at the comparisons. The rich getting richer, the military, industry having too much power, the same old men and some women running our lives from Washington year after year after year, in all of their campaigns, paid for by the very rich and business interests. They stay in power and use us to keep them there. That sounds a lot like a conspiracy theory, I said, liking the idea but wondering what else was there. It's not, Randy said. Think about it. The government waves the flag to keep everyone proud and focused on their pride as Americans. The Romans did the same thing, and every time there was a threat to the empire, every time people asked for a return to the republic, the emperors did the same. Wow, Professor Heather exclaimed. It's how Caesar took total control from the beginning. He played the rich against the poor, promised both something he never really gave them, and kept them distracted by wars and pride in each other. And Octavian was even worse, Randy said. He made Caesar seem like a saint to the people, so he could continue with the civil war and keep power while getting rid of all his political foes. I leaned back and looked from one to the other, impressed by their work. The story of Caesar wasn't really in the book, I observed. I know, Heather said, but once the idea took hold, I went back and did some quick reading. And you? I asked Randy. He already knew all that, Heather answered for him. My quick research was reading a term paper he did for Professor Whitman's class last year. I just nodded, still leaned back in my chair and looking from one to the other. But as I thought more about their topic, the more my smile widened after maybe a minute of silence. They both started grinning, too. It's good, isn't it? Heather asked. I said, maybe real good. There's been a lot written about the switch from republic to empire, but not much looked at it from the other side, from what little things could have changed to stop the fall into tyranny. She gave Randy a look, and he blushed under her gaze, but the smile stayed on his face. I'm pretty sure he cared more about Heather's approval than mine. Okay, I said, leaning forward in my chair. Here's how this is going to happen. You two spend the next week independently researching as many sources as you can about conditions in Rome between, say, 100 BC and 47 BC. Make that 110 BC land reforms were starting then, stratification of wealth, wars, senators, and leadership. Maybe even how it was almost hereditary by that time. And you will do it separately, understand? Understood, they chimed. Then get together and give me an outline with sources. Nothing fancy, just the basics. Okay, they nodded. Then the following week, I want the same thing on the United States from after World War II to the beginning of Bill Clinton's presidency. Include as many names of long-term senators and congressmen, high-level officials and their children or other close relatives in high government positions. Sound doable as long as it's just the basics, Heather said. Yeah, Randy chimed in. We can't get that much detail so quickly. Just the basics for now, I confirmed, then gave them both a stern look. But there's one other thing you need to include in all of that. What? Randy asked. You've got your basic idea. Okay, I'm saying, in an article or more likely a book, that the Roman Republic became a dictatorship because of certain things, that changing any of countless little things could have changed that, and that those same things are now happening in America. Right. They nodded. Well, don't be totally convinced of your idea, okay? Just because we think that doesn't mean you should ignore all evidence against it. If there are any differences, I want them. And I want them highlighted, underlined 3 times and made very clear. Okay, even if there's a contradiction in the sources, I want it raised. Am I clear? Because that may change your idea, but it still doesn't ruin the whole thing. Right. Exactly, I confirmed. But if you want the whole thing to be a mess, then ignore anything that disagrees with you and just push ahead with your own set of facts and make me look like a fool in the process. Being selective with your facts is for demagogues, Randy said, starting one of the sayings I often repeated in classes. But it's not for historians, Heather finished for him. My goodness, I said, you two actually listened in class. They chuckled, but their excitement over my reception of their idea and their new project was written all over their faces. After a hard summer of misery and loneliness, the first day of classes was like putting on an old pair of leather shoes, familiar and comfortable. I knew what to expect. I was happy to be where I was, and I was relieved to enjoy the simple joy of teaching a group of young men and women who, for the most part, were equally excited about learning from me. It was nice, almost as nice as getting home to Kyle and Sunny. My time there was becoming easy and comfortable. Not that it didn't have its tough moments. It did. But I was getting better at handling both the present and the past. Each day. Little did I know. Look, Dad, Kyle said during breakfast, pointing to a picture on the front page of the Lincoln County Register. I know, I said, putting the paper down. Your mom is on the front page. Why? He asked. She started a big trial yesterday. What kind of trial? Some men are accused of selling drugs, illegal drugs to children. I nodded. Kyle cared deeply for all children, which hurt even more because of his own situation. Sometimes to adults, too, and moms try to put them in jail, I added. That's right, he said, smiling for the first time when we talked about his mom. That's right, I agreed. Then I thought of something else. She might be a little late tonight, honey. Why? He asked. Because of this trial. They sometimes go late. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. That's okay. I guess it's pretty important, right? But not more important than you, little man. I know. Just can't be helped, I guess. Exactly, but it doesn't mean she loves you any less. I know, Dad. He turned back to the comics, and I hoped Whitney would call soon. By 6:30, though, I was getting annoyed. Years of experience had taught me that trials usually ended by 5. That was enough time for her to get home and pick up Kyle. Definitely enough time to at least call. I started calling her cell phone and office phone at 6:55, but only left a string of frustrated messages. By 9, I was too mad to leave any more messages. Kyle had been in bed for half an hour, sad and upset, and I hoped she would answer so I could let her know how I felt. But she still wasn't answering by 9:30, so I gave up. What did I expect? She had ignored Kyle again, just like she had done to me during our marriage. Still, doing this to her own kid? You're kidding me, right? My senior seminar, 20th Century Foreign Policy Decision-Making, finished at 2:20. I was packing up my things in the small classroom when I heard someone clear his throat. I looked up and saw a man and woman about my age, both dressed in slacks and dress shirts with a sport coat on him and a business jacket on her. They had tired eyes, and he had a natural slouch. She was tall and slim, with hazel eyes that looked worn out. I also noticed the bulges under their armpits from their shoulder holsters. Professor Patterson, the man said. What can I do for you, detective? I asked, closing my briefcase and leaning against the lectern. He glanced at her, raised an eyebrow, then turned back to me. Shoulder holsters, neat haircuts, dressed in jackets. You're either police detectives or rogue spies here to kidnap me. Since I can't imagine why a foreign government or even my own would want anything with me, I figure you're detectives. Am I wrong? Lieutenant gave orders, the man said, nodding his head at the woman. Sergeant Adams. What can I do for you, Lieutenant? Do you have a few minutes? We'd like to ask you some questions. I looked at my watch. I can give you 15 minutes. Then I have to get home before my son gets back from school. He looked at her again, and something passed between them. He turned back to me and started with the questions. Were you married to Whitney Patterson? Yes. The prosecutor? That's the one. And you're divorced now, right? Yes. When's the last time you spoke with her? Sunday morning, I said, around 11. And what was that conversation about? She wanted to drop Kyle off a day early. It was her weekend for visitation. Did that make you angry? A little, but it ended up working out. And why were you angry? None of your business. He looked at the sergeant, who gave a grim smile and took over the questioning. Did she say why she was dropping him off early? Yes. She waited for me to continue, but I was already annoyed by their attitudes. So I answered their question and waited for the next one. Okay, Professor, she said, impatience in her voice. Why was she dropping him off early? She said she was dropping him off early, I stressed, because there was nothing for Kyle to do at her apartment. He was bored. He missed his puppy and she wanted to start getting ready for her big trial that started a couple of days ago. But you didn't believe her? She asked, catching my tone. I shrugged. I didn't really think about it. If that's what she said, that's what she said. So you don't trust her? The lieutenant asked, zeroing in on my lack of clear answers. She's my ex-wife, Lieutenant. Only about a month ago, so you'll excuse me if we're not on the best of terms right now. So it was a bitter divorce, he pressed. Is there ever a happy one? So it was bitter, Sergeant Adams noted in her notebook. When I said nothing, the lieutenant took over again. What did you say when she said she was bringing him home? I told her to go ahead. Any plans I had could be adjusted. Were you angry? No. Not even a little? No. So you're telling me... The proper way to ask the question, Lieutenant, I interrupted, my voice turning authoritative, is... Sure, here's a simplified and more accessible version of the text with the necessary adjustments. How did you feel when she asked to bring him home early? He frowned at my words, and I frowned right back. The answer, I said, is frustrated. It was very frustrating. We had already changed our weekend plans to help her out. Then she missed her first Wednesday night visit for the same reason. Now she wanted to cut short her first visit for work. I was both frustrated and sad for Kyle. He doesn't deserve to feel like he's not important to his mom. I looked at Sergeant Adams, who softened her look and avoided my eyes. Write it down, Sergeant. Frustrated. You didn't miss bitter, so don't miss this one. She looked at Gavers, who nodded. She wrote it down. Let's cut this short, I said. She dropped him off at the curb. Didn't even bring him to the door or help with his bag, and that's the last I've heard from her. What about last night? Sergeant Adams asked. It was a Wednesday. Did she show up? I shook my head. She didn't even call. She just ignored him. And yes, that made me very angry. So what did you do? Gavers asked. I left about 7 messages on her cell phone and at her office. When? Between 7 o'clock and about 9:30. My messages started out just annoyed and ended very angry. You should have seen Kyle's face as the night went on, with her not even bothering to call. I was furious. And then Gavers said something that made my anger vanish. She's missing, he said. She didn't show up at work this morning. No one's seen her since she left the courthouse just after 5 yesterday. My eyes went wide as I looked between the two of them. So you were home last night between, say, 4:30 and 8 o'clock? Adams asked. I nodded. Did anyone else see you besides your son? I nodded again. The neighbors, the real messiahs, they saw me at around 5. We chatted for a few minutes while the kids played, then again at about 6:30 and a few times after that when I went onto the back deck to call Whitney. They were out in their yard all night. Yes, I said, my voice cracking, having a barbecue. Then Sally and Charlie just sat on the deck talking and watching their kids run around until about 7:30 or so. They weren't out there after that. I saw movement at the door and looked over. Gavers shrugged. Professor Whitman, I said to the Dean of History. Hey, Luke. I looked at the two detectives. "We're done here," Gavers said. Sergeant Adams closed her notebook while Gavers reached into his jacket pocket. "Here," he said, holding out an old, worn business card. "If you think of anything, call us, okay?" I put the card in my pocket and watched them leave. They both nodded to Professor Whitman as they walked past him. "Luke, is this a bad time?" I stared at him, wondering what I was going to tell Kyle. "What is it?" "It's Whitney," I said. "She's disappeared." His eyes went wide. "My God." "Sorry," I said, grabbing my briefcase. "I have to get home before Kyle gets there." I hurried past him without looking back. I checked the call history on my home phone and saw a number from Sunday I didn't recognize. I dialed it and wrote it down on a piece of paper while it rang. "Hello?" she answered. "Kristen," I said. "I got it right on the first try. Look, can you come over here?" "Luke, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" "It's Whitney. She's disappeared." "Did she run away or is she missing?" "She's missing. I think she was taken. The cops interviewed me an hour and a half ago. She didn't show up for work this morning and no one's seen her since last night." "Maybe she just needed to get away?" "No way! She's in the middle of a big trial. If she just left, she'd get in huge trouble and maybe never work again." Kristen didn't hesitate. "We'll be right over." 10 minutes later, Ben ran through the house and out the back door. Kristen followed him, looking worried as she looked at me. "You okay?" she asked. "What do I tell him?" I asked. "Nothing. Not a thing." "But what if," she asked, looking determined, "if it's the worst case, you tell him when you're sure. Otherwise, just say she's busy and we'll spend more time with him after the trial. So lie to him." "Yes, Luke, you can't tell him she's missing. Do you want to tell him she might be hurt or worse?" I shuddered. These thoughts had run through my mind too. Despite everything, Whitney was still Kyle's mom. And I realized once more I still had some love for her, even though she left me. "Listen," Kristen said, her voice calm and firm. "If he thinks she's ignoring him, he'll be hurt and angry, but he'll deal with that. He's been dealing with it for a while now, but if you tell him she might be gone or worse, he'll be a mess. He'll have nightmares. So don't tell him unless you have no choice." She was right. Forget about being completely honest. Life is full of gray areas. If ever there was a time to lie to your kid, this was definitely one of them. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "Let the police handle it," she said, reading the worry on my face. She rushed to add, "I know it's hard. I know you feel helpless, but you're a history professor, Luke, not a trained cop." "But there must be something I can do," I insisted. She hugged me tightly. I rested my head on her shoulder, smelling her peach-scented shampoo. It reminded me of Whitney. "Hold it together, Luke," she whispered. "Be strong for Kyle. That's the best thing you can do right now. Got it?" I hugged her tighter, feeling a bit better with her close. "Now let's get dinner ready," she said, loosening her grip. "We'll stay for a while so Kyle has company." "Thanks," I managed to say. "What are friends for?" she replied, busying herself with the contents of the fridge. I slept fitfully, waking up from bad dreams. My hip throbbed. In the dreams, I was back in Iraq, surrounded and being shot at. My platoon was down, and I kept firing, bullets tearing into me. I woke up gasping, the last image in my mind. Whitney being dragged away by soldiers, me failing to save her with my gun. I looked outside. The sky was gray with storm clouds. It began to drizzle, just like many mornings since that day in Iraq. My hip and thigh ached as if the wounds were fresh. But today, Whitney was gone without a trace. The urge to do something, to find her, gnawed at me. Kristen's words echoed in my mind. What did I know about finding someone who was kidnapped? Still, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling. After 2 hours, Kyle mentioned something that made everything click. I read the newspaper article again. It was about Whitney's disappearance and the delay in a drug trafficking trial. The defense attorney, Lawton Dunlop, wanted the trial to continue or be dismissed. He looked like a TV lawyer with his expensive suit and perfect smile. As I stared at the paper, something niggled at me. Whitney had vanished, and the defense attorney was pushing hard for the trial to resume or be dropped. When I showed the paper to Kyle, the bombshell hit. "Why is Mommy in the paper, and Charlie?" he asked. "Charlie?" I asked, confused. Kyle pointed to the pictures on the front page. Yeah, Charlie. He's a lawyer like Mommy. He came over on Sunday. I flipped back to the front page. This man? I pointed to Dunlop's photo. Yeah, he said, returning to his comics. I sat there, shocked. Charlie was Charles Lawton Dunlop, CLD. The email address wasn't for her firm, but for Dunlop. Whitney had been seeing the defense attorney while the trial was ongoing. It became clear why Whitney was missing. I hurried to make a call with this new information. Before dialing, another thought crossed my mind. When did Dunlop start targeting Whitney? Likely, once she was part of the prosecution. Why did he go after her to get inside information on the prosecution's case? Did he want to somehow get her off the case and have a less skilled prosecutor take over so they could work together to sabotage the trial? All of these were possibilities. If he was already their defense attorney, why did Whitney let it happen? That would have created a scandal and ruined her career. Before asking for help, I needed to do some research. What are you doing, Dad? Kyle asked, putting his bowl and glass into the dishwasher. I'll only be a few minutes, I said, rushing to the den and logging onto the computer. A quick search of the newspaper's archives gave me all the information I needed in less than 10 minutes. When the LaBroses were first charged, they had an attorney named Leland Smithers. Smithers stayed on the case until 3 months ago when Dunlop's name started showing up as their defense attorney. 3 months ago. Well after our divorce was filed. My eyes focused on the screen, anger boiling inside me. That slimy jerk had tried to wreck my marriage to get an advantage in defending a couple of low-life drug dealers. Driving Kyle to school, I made up my mind. Forget about the games, and forget about the police, and forget about Charles Lawton Dunlop. This was personal, and I wanted revenge. My Thursday classes were both in the morning and finished by noon. To this day, I don't really remember much about the classes. I just rambled on about whatever was in the books, gave short answers to questions, and ran to my car as soon as the second class was over. Look, I heard Doug calling from behind me. I didn't stop, though. Instead, I waved, hopped in my car, and drove off quickly. I needed to think, make a plan, and gather as much information as possible in the next few hours. I didn't want to rush and act on guesses while ignoring any facts that didn't fit my ideas. There was still a chance that Charles Lawton Dunlop was not the mystery man, but it seemed unlikely. If nothing else, the additional information would help me plan. 3 hours later, I was in my den, deep in thought. My research had turned up some interesting facts. First, Charles Lawton Dunlop had been a lawyer for 14 years and was almost 40. He had spent his entire career in criminal defense, first with the public defender's office and then on his own for the past 9 years. He had a roughly even record on cases that went to trial, which was impressive. Most of his cases, however, never went to trial because they were often dropped with no clear reason. Moreover, newspaper reports of his trials suggested that several jury acquittals were unexpected. Thus, Dunlop seemed to have a shady background, which led to obvious questions. How did Whitney not know about his background? And if she did, why would she ever let him charm her without being more cautious? This led me to the sad conclusion that she was ready to leave, that our marriage was already over in her mind. Second, the LaBroses were Carlo and Vincent. They owned 14 pizza parlors throughout the Chicago suburbs, and news reports hinted they were connected to the Chicago mob. In the newspaper pictures, Carlo was about 50, short, chunky, and bald. Vincent was a few years younger, also short but lean, with thinning hair combed back and acne scars on his cheeks. Carlo looked like a waddling pig with fat lips. Vincent looked like a ferret-faced thug with thin lips. In both pictures, they looked dangerous. The way they stared at the camera gave me chills. Third, the LaBroses were being tried in state court for selling heroin through their pizza parlors. But the state case was just a warm-up for a bigger federal case for organized crime charges. The federal charges had only come down the previous month, based on the idea that they were shipping drugs into the country mixed with pizza-making supplies. Most thought that if the state case failed, the LaBroses would still get caught in the federal case. Still, if they didn't win the state case first, the outcome of the federal case wouldn't matter. So I had a mob lawyer and his 2 mob clients. I needed to figure out what they had done with Whitney and, if she wasn't already dead, how to get her back. I had to link Dunlop to the kidnapping without anyone knowing I was involved. Sure, Carlo and Vincent LeBrose were involved in Dunlop's plan that ended my marriage, but I didn't want to cross the mob. It would be great to catch them too, but that wasn't my priority. And that's when I began to have serious doubts. If I got caught, I would put Kyle's life at risk. I didn't need mobsters hunting for me and endangering Kyle. I also didn't need to be on the run, moving my son from place to place. I was about to give up when the doorbell rang. "Professor Patterson," said a lieutenant when I opened the door, "may we come in for a moment?" I looked at my watch. 3:10. Kyle would be home any minute. "This way," I said, leading them to the back deck. "Kyle doesn't know anything yet, and I don't want him to find out until we know for sure what's happening." I showed up with the serious-looking Sergeant Adams following me. We went through the house to the back deck. I let Kyle go out first, then I closed the door behind us. "Heard anything yet?" I asked. He paused, then turned to Sergeant Adams. "We have a few more questions," she said, opening her notebook. I waited, staring at them. "Did your ex-wife wear any jewelry?" she asked. I closed my eyes, thinking of her. Yes. She wore a gold locket around her neck. Inside was a picture of Kyle. She nodded and made a note. Then she sighed and looked at Kyle's eyes narrowed, then turned to me. "Why did you get divorced?" he asked. "None of your business," I snapped back. "It is my business," he replied with a sigh. "And unless you want us to arrest you and take you in for a more serious interrogation, you'll answer my question. Why did you get divorced? We know you filed, so why?" I looked at him, then at her. Adams seemed embarrassed by the whole thing, but Kyle looked patient. I answered, looking at Adams. "She said she didn't love me anymore. After all those years together, she got bored and wanted something new. I don't know why. I didn't hit her. I made good money and took care of the house, Kyle and her." I felt a lump in my throat and tried to keep my emotions in check. "I still don't know why." Adams gazed at the ground, unmoving. "Was she seeing someone else?" Kyle asked, pushing forward. "I don't know," I lied, then softened it. "Maybe she wouldn't tell me. She said there was someone, but it wasn't romantic. At least that's what she told me." "Do you know who it could have been?" He stared intensely at me, and I forced myself to look him in the eye. "Not a clue," I replied. His right eyebrow rose slightly. "Any guesses?" he pressed on. "Could have been anyone. Someone she works with, perhaps. She worked long hours and often came home late. She had plenty of time." He kept staring at me, knowing I was lying. As much as I tried to hide it, there was something in his face that made me smirk, letting him know I knew he saw through my lie. "You know," he said after a moment, "this changes how I see things." "How so?" I asked. She was cheating. "You're divorced now, but you're still angry. Angry enough to maybe want to hurt her." "Really?" I said. "Yes," he agreed. "Good luck proving it," I said with a sneer. "I have a solid alibi for the whole night, and you know it. I saw the police talking to Sally Romesco next door when I got home. Or didn't you speak with them yet?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe I looked up hitmen online, paid them, and they showed up right away. Happens all the time, right?" Adams, looking more determined, cut in. "We know family members or ex-husbands are usually suspects, but you know this is nonsense." Kyle tried a different approach. "If you're hiding something, anything, you could be charged as an accomplice. Nice try, Lieutenant, but no luck there either. And any obstruction of justice charges you're thinking of won't work." He just stared at me, his frustration showing. "So are we done here?" I asked, noticing the front door opening. "I think my son is home." They both glared at me, then Sergeant Adams realized they wouldn't get any more from me. As I walked past them back into the house, they left through the front door. "Hey, little man," I said, picking him up as they left. We spent the next hour finishing his homework. Then Kyle went outside to play with the Romesco kids. I spent the time thinking it all through. Point number 1, if I told the cops what I knew, they'd just bring Dunlop in for questioning. He wouldn't break. He's a lawyer, for heaven's sake. And if he didn't break, he might kill Whitney and hide her somewhere they'd never find her. Police rules help the bad guys, but I'm not bound by those rules. Point number 2, yes, Whitney cheated on me. And even worse to me, she rejected me, but that doesn't mean I want my son's mom to die a terrible death. If she's still alive, I have to save her. Also, I need to make sure I don't get killed doing it. I want to live, but more importantly, I can't leave Kyle an orphan. Point number 3. If I find Whitney and she's still alive, I need to do all of this without anyone finding out or even suspecting me. The mob scares me more than the police, but both scare me a lot. Getting killed is bad, but going to jail for a long time is almost as bad. Point number 4. I have to do this alone. The more people involved, the higher the chance I get caught. That's when I went to the basement and opened my weapons safe. A plan started forming in my head. I took out the Colt AR-15 I had owned for years, laying it on a table. I took it apart, then spent the next 15 minutes cleaning and oiling it. Next, I loaded 320-round clips with ammo and stacked them next to the rifle. Then, I took out the Glock 9mm guns and cleaned them too. After that, I filled their clips with bullets. I finished all this in about 30 minutes. I put everything into a duffel bag, including a black ski mask, black sweatpants, black shoes, socks, and a sweatshirt. I thought about using black shoe polish on my hands, but decided against it. If I got caught, it would be hard to explain, and it would take days to wash off. By the time I was done, I almost had a clear plan. That's when I remembered something important. It was something I'd been ignoring, but I decided to check it out just in case it was useful. Surprisingly, it gave me a lot of information and confirmed what I'd been thinking. I logged in and clicked on the last email. "Luke, I'm so sorry, dear Luke," she wrote. "By now you know everything. You know I lied. You know I cheated. You might have even figured out who he is. If not, his name is Charles Dunlop. He's a lawyer and a good one. I don't know how it all started. I remember being upset with you. With me? Really? But I blamed you. I felt guilty. Guilty because you do so much. So many things I always wanted to do. You took care of the cooking and cleaning. And Kyle. Those were things I should have been doing, or at least helping with a lot more. But I was close to getting promoted at my job, chief of the criminal division. After 10 years, I was so close to my goal, and I felt guilty that I was achieving it at the expense of my family. So how did this become your fault? Because I now realize I blamed you for picking up the slack so I could chase my career. I know it doesn't make sense. I see that now. But at the time, I thought that if you'd stood up to me more, if you'd at least complained about having to do everything, I would have been forced to cut back at work and spend more time at home. Pretty messed up, right? Just writing this, it still doesn't make sense to me. I was blaming you for supporting my goals and giving you very little in return. I don't know how Charlie saw this, but he did. He noticed my unhappiness and went out of his way to cheer me up and seduce me, and I let him. I wish I had an excuse to make all of this your fault. I don't. None of it was your fault. Your only mistake was being there for Kyle and me, always giving your all without complaint. I know now the enormity of my mistake. Actually, I knew that Saturday when I left you with Kyle to meet Charlie. That's why I ended it that day. And I wanted to come home and somehow get you to forgive me. But you didn't. I don't blame you for any of this. If the roles had been reversed, I'd never have forgiven you either. I do know a few things, though. For example, I know my biggest mistake wasn't cheating on you with Charles. Sure, that was unforgivable. Nor was my biggest mistake refusing to just come clean and tell you everything, which was also unforgivable. No. My biggest mistake was telling you that I didn't love you anymore and didn't want to stay married. The first two mistakes were probably enough to end things. But the third mistake sealed the death of our marriage. I want you to know that I will never forgive myself for any of this. For cheating on you, for refusing to come clean, and worst of all, for letting you believe that any of this was your fault. It was all my fault, mine alone. So many times after you filed for divorce, I wanted to tell you all of this. But I saw your pain every day, the pain I caused you, and knew I didn't deserve you back. And I knew you deserved someone who would never do this to you. To this day, I can barely look at you without feeling overwhelmed by my shame. In closing, Luke, I know what I have done has ruined my marriage, my husband, my son, and our family. I wish I could take it back. I sit alone in my apartment every night dreaming of the past and wondering what I was thinking. I just wanted you to know that I have one last big trial coming up. I'm going to win it, and then I'll be offered the position I've always wanted, chief of the criminal division. When they make me that offer, I'm going to resign. I'm going to dedicate myself to being a mother to our little boy. I hope you'll let me do this. It's the only dream I have left to keep me sane, and I want to do my fair share so you can rebuild your own life after my cheating, with eternal shame and lasting love, Whitney." My eyes were wet by the time I finished reading Whitney's confession. My mind was full of what-ifs. What if she'd told me the truth that day? Would I have taken her back and tried to move past her cheating? What if I'd paid more attention months before when she started pulling away? Could I have stopped it all? If is the saddest word in the English language. Now that my suspicions were confirmed, I wondered if Whitney had figured out Dunlop's real plan before she disappeared. And if she did, how did she feel learning that she destroyed her marriage for a man who didn't care about her or her problems, but only wanted an advantage in a legal case? My sadness turned into anger as I deleted the message and wiped all traces of it from my computer. Unfortunately, I couldn't hide my feelings when Kristen and Ben showed up. Kristen took one look at me, then turned to Ben and told him to go outside and play. Her eyes stayed on me the whole time. "You know who took her, right?" she said once Ben was outside. "You know where she is." I didn't answer. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I need you to watch Kyle tonight," I replied, the only words I could muster. "Luke, please," she begged. "Call the police. You can't handle this alone. You'll get killed. What will happen to Kyle then?" I shook my head. "I can't say much, Kristen." "That's nonsense," she snapped, checking to make sure the boys couldn't hear us. "You're going to act like a hero, maybe get killed or hurt without thinking for 1 second about Kyle." "That's nonsense," I snapped back. "You think I haven't thought about this? If I call the cops, she might get killed so they won't get caught. What do I tell Kyle then? But if they haven't killed her yet and I can catch them before they do?" "Luke, please," she pleaded, her eyes begging me to rethink my decision. "There must be another way." I shook my head again. "I've been thinking about it all day. There's no other way. Believe me. You think I want to do this?" She stayed quiet, her eyes still pleading with me not to go, but my words were sinking in. "Trust me," I said. "I've thought of nothing but Kyle. The bottom line is this. I can't look at Kyle if Whitney's killed and he has to go to her funeral knowing I could have stopped it. Or if she dies, maybe I can still catch the scum who did this." She started shaking, fear and the seriousness of the situation overwhelming her. "Promise me you won't get hurt," she said. "Please, Luke, be careful." I tried to smile. "Just keep an eye on the boys tonight. I'll be back by midnight or so, okay?" Tears ran down her cheeks, and I gently wiped them away with my fingers. "Hold yourself together. Watch the boys. It'll be okay." She nodded. "Okay." I left at 8, just before sunset. My plan had to be done at night. I had no idea how many of them there were, where I was going, or what exactly I would do. The night and surprise were my only friends. As I drove out, I saw a car parked down the block start to move with its headlights off. I wasn't alone. I drove slowly, not wanting to get pulled over and have my weapons found. Getting caught would mean Whitney would disappear for good. 20 minutes later, I drove past Charles Dunlop's law office. No lights were on, and no cars in the parking lot. I hoped he was home and living at the address from the phone book. My plan was risky, but it seemed like the only way to make him lead me to Whitney, or her kidnappers. I was still being followed, and when I passed through a well-lit intersection, I finally saw the driver, Sergeant Adams. They knew I was hiding something and guessed I planned to do something about it. Great, I thought. Now I have to avoid them while trying to save Whitney. I thought of different ways this could go, wondering if she had backup. It had been like this in the military. Make a great plan, start it, and then something goes wrong. The great tacticians could deal with changes and find solutions quickly. But I wasn't a great tactician. I was a West Point graduate who got seriously injured in my first combat. I hadn't thought like a soldier in nearly 20 years, and it wasn't coming back quickly. I pushed these thoughts away as I pulled in front of Dunlop's house. The living room was lit, and I saw a figure moving behind the curtains. It was now or never. I went over my plan again. If it failed, Whitney would die. They wouldn't keep her alive if they thought the cops were onto them. If I did nothing, she would die anyway. Deciding they would probably kill her either way if I didn't act, I pulled out a disposable cell phone and called the pre-programmed number. Dunlop answered on the second ring. "Hello? This will be quick," I said. "Who is this?" he asked. "Quiet. I'm a friend." That's all you need to know." He hesitated, then asked, "What do you want?" "Your phones are bugged. Office, cell, and home." He said nothing, so I continued. "Wiretap warrants were signed this afternoon. Your name is on one of them. You think long and hard about whose names are on the others." "And why tell me this?" he demanded. "I'll make myself known to you soon," I said. "When I do, you'll owe me." "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "Can you afford not to believe me?" I replied. "This chat is over. I won't say more in case the bugs are live." With that, I ended the call. I parked at the far end of the street and waited to see if Dunlop took the bait. I didn't spot Sergeant Adams, but I guess she was outside the street keeping an eye on us. 10 minutes later, Dunlop came out, checked his surroundings, then got into his Cadillac and drove off. I smiled, pleased with myself. I started my car and followed the Cadillac, staying far behind. It felt like a scene from an old comedy where everything goes wrong. Sergeant Adams was driving behind me. Soon we were speeding down country roads at nearly 70 miles per hour. This was my worst fear. I threw my cell phone out the window into a creek. If I kept up with Dunlop, Adams could stop me, and I might lose Whitney forever. If I didn't keep up, I would lose track of Dunlop and Whitney might get hurt. I had to make a quick decision. I chose to follow Dunlop and hope that Adams would see I was following the kidnapper. I trusted Adams to let me keep following Dunlop instead of stopping me. I pressed the accelerator to catch up with the fading taillights. After about 2 miles, Adams had not stopped me. Instead, she was following about a quarter mile behind. I smiled, thinking we could easily lose each other on this empty road. But just as I felt confident, the Cadillac's tail lights turned and vanished. I slowed down to 50 miles per hour, not wanting to pass him if he was hiding in a turnoff. Even at 50, I almost missed the overgrown dirt trail going into the woods. A few hundred yards in, I saw the red tail lights flicker and then stop. I pulled my car into a ditch and got out. Adams slowed down behind me. I put on my mask, grabbed my bag, and quickly disappeared into the woods before Adams could see me. I watched from the trees as Adams stopped and shone a light into my car. She spoke briefly on a cell phone and then pulled her car in front of mine. I was deep in the woods, walking parallel to the dirt trail. It was a dark night and the ground was wet from rain. My pants were soaked, but I didn't care. My adrenaline was pumping. It reminded me of my time in the army. The tense planning, followed by actions both calm and intense. This situation felt like the time I went into combat in Iraq, knowing it would be dangerous and people could die. Back then, I was scared but alert. Every tiny sound made me jump. Now it felt worse because I was out of practice and no longer young. After about 300 yards, I came to a break in the woods. I stopped and looked at the open space. Down a gentle hill about 75 yards away was an old metal shed. The Cadillac was parked in front of it next to a beaten-up Ford truck. Without thinking, I checked the area for tactical advantages. I was on higher ground with trees for cover. They were in a low spot, making it hard for them to move without me seeing them. The vehicles were close to the shed, so they could run to them easily, but I couldn't shoot if Whitney was with them. There was a propane tank 60 feet to the left of the shed. I needed to avoid it at all costs. A stray shot could blow it up. On the right side, I saw lights from windows. There was nothing else but some sparse grass leading to the edge of the forest. I thought about my approach. If I hid at the edge of the woods to my right, I would have a clear view inside the shed and could see anyone coming out. I started moving along the wood line, low and quiet, keeping an eye out for any sound or movement. I circled the area, staying alert. When I reached the opposite side, I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and moved down the slope toward the shed. "Don't talk about killing her, man," I heard a whiny voice say from inside. The voice was slurred, like he was drunk. The windows must be open. I smelled something strange from inside. It was metallic and medicinal, unpleasant. "Don't worry," another voice yelled back. "We don't have to do it. Someone else is coming to take care of it. We just need to wait here." "But it's still murder if we get caught," the first voice whined. "I didn't sign up for murder. Kidnapping is one thing, but murder, no way." "You really think kidnapping is okay?" the second voice shot back. "You could still face 20 or 30 years for kidnapping. Are you okay with that? Because I'm not." There was a silence. The first voice spoke again. "Did you hear that?" "There's nothing out there," the second voice said, his tone lower. "You've been using too much of your own stuff. Forget you." I heard footsteps, then shuffling and a muffled voice. A woman's voice with her mouth likely taped shut. It was Whitney. I was sure she was still alive. And now, because of my phone call, they were doing this. They were waiting for someone else to show up so they could kill her. Might as well take the blindfold off. Voice 2 said, "She won't identify anyone after tonight. Let them do it." Voice 1 pouted. I'd heard enough. I made my way back to the edge of the woods and moved along the tree line. My eyes scanned the ground in front as I moved. I saw the doorway clearly and stopped, dropped the duffel bag and got my weapons. The Glock went into the small of my back. Then I laid flat on the damp grass. My arms cradled the rifle close to my chest. I aimed along the barrel and turned the safety switch to semi-automatic. "This is where I'd set up too," Gav said behind me. I froze, staying low. I heard his pistol cock behind me. "Drop the rifle now." My body relaxed as I flipped the rifle back to safe. When we came out of the woods, he said, "You were already circling around. Pretty good. But you should have stayed lower and watched more than just the shed." I heard movement through the underbrush, then felt his feet behind me. "Then I saw it all and knew what you were doing." He continued, "Keeping them pinned in. Good plan. She's alive," I said. "She's in there and she's alive." Off to my left, I heard someone gasp. Gavs was silent for a moment. "Did you hear her?" Adam asked. "Yes. Are you sure?" It was a woman. Her mouth was taped or something. I didn't see anyone, but I could hear them. "How many?" Gavs asked. "2 for sure. I don't think there's anyone else but 2 for sure. One of them's Dunlop, the other's high on something. Meth. Adam said you can smell it. This place is a meth lab. For sure." "Any more surprises before we cuff you to a tree?" Gavs asked. "More are coming," I said. "They're waiting for someone else to show up. That someone's going to kill her and get rid of the body." I heard a snort from Adam. "You're—" But her voice stopped when headlights came from the edge of the woods and moved down the slope to the shed. "You don't have any rifles?" I asked, switching the rifle back to semi-automatic. "Don't do it," Adam said. "You need me," I insisted. "It's just the 2 of you, and now you're outnumbered. And you don't have a rifle. They'll kill her. Without me, there's nothing you can do about it." I heard Gavs move quickly and not so quietly. "Keep them pinned down," he whispered to me before breaking from the woods. "And don't let anyone out of that car." Adam started to protest but thought better of it. Instead, she crouched down next to me. "You could have told us," she said. "And you wouldn't have been able to do anything," I said. My eyes focused on the car slowing near the shed. I glanced right and saw that guy still exposed, less than 20 feet down the slope. I looked back at the car. I took a breath and squeezed the trigger. The car jerked with the crack of the rifle and I turned to the left. It took 2 shots to take out the left tire, leaving the car 20 feet from the other vehicles. "What the heck?" someone shouted below, and I saw the front door swing open. A tall, thin figure stepped into the light. I put a shot high on the door frame. "Don't hit him," Adam warned as the figure dropped to the ground, looking around wildly before scrambling back inside. "Shut up," I hissed, turning back to the car and putting 2 shots into the grill. Steam started hissing from under the hood. They were in trouble now, and I knew it. "He's there," Adam whispered, her voice losing all excitement. I glanced at the shed and saw Gavs with his back against the wall, pistol ready. I looked back at the vehicles and in 4 shots took out the front tires of the Cadillac and the pickup truck. For good measure, I put 2 rounds each into the grills. Steam started from the Cadillac. I saw the passenger door open on the new car, the one with at least one, if not both, of the lab guys. I put a round into the door and it slammed shut. "He's pointing," Adam said. I looked back, grabbing a clip as I did. Gavs was holding up his hand, making a shooting sign toward the end of the shed. I slammed the clip in, aimed high on the other side of the shed and fired 5 rounds. Gaves extended his arms and pistol through the window. There was 1 shot. Then Gavs was climbing through the window. The front door burst open, and Dunlop sprinted around the vehicles and into the woods. "He's getting away," Adam said by the propane tank. I ignored both Adam and the fleeing Dunlop. My eyes stayed on the lab guys. They were still alive and surely had weapons. "You," I said, eyes still on the barrel. Get behind them, then come in low. Stay in the tree line. But they've got guns, and Gavs is alone in the shed. If one of them gets out of that car into that shed, we've got problems. Without another word, she sprinted off. A minute later, I saw someone being pushed out through the window. She fell to the ground with a slow thud. I knew that hair and weak figure. It was Whitney. For a short moment, I felt a wave of relief. Whitney was safe, for now. She started to stumble up the hill toward the woods, staying behind the shed. That was good. I turned back to the people by their car. Adams was moving down the hill behind them. They needed to focus on me. I fired 5 shots at their car without warning. Someone in the car fired back, but I ducked low into the dirt. The bullets missed me, hitting trees and ground nearby. They now knew where I was. Then I heard Adam shout, "Drop your guns!" I looked up. She stood behind the car, pointing her gun at them. She yelled again, "Now!" After a short pause, I saw them drop their guns. Next, Adams came out and stood behind the car. He said something I couldn't hear. The car doors opened and the 2 people inside got out and lay flat on the ground. Once they were handcuffed, I grabbed my bag and took one last look at the shed. I began running along the edge of the trees. When I saw Whitney in the woods, I slowed down. She was looking at the shed, shaking with fear. "You'll be okay," I whispered as I got closer. She pulled back, trying to make herself smaller. I stopped in front of her and held out my hand. "It's me," I said through my ski mask. "You're going to be okay." Slowly, she reached out and touched my hand. She then grabbed it tightly. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you back." Whitney followed without a word. As we got closer to the shed, I stopped. "You're safe now," I said. She squeezed my hand tighter, not wanting to let go. "I have to leave, Whitney," I said. "You need to let go. If I stay, I'll get arrested." That seemed to make sense to her, and she released my hand. "Remember," I said, holding her chin, "I was never here. Got it?" She nodded. I turned and ran back to the trees, heading up the path toward the road. I had to get out before more police showed up. I hoped Adams wouldn't talk. Near the road, I heard sirens in the distance. They were getting close. As I reached for my car keys, I heard a noise from behind. I was knocked to the ground. "Who are you?" Dunlop screamed, trying to pull off my mask. I focused on escaping. He raised his arm to punch me, but I pushed against him, stopping his attack. Rolling over, I felt metal press into my side. I pulled out my gun and hit Dunlop on the head until he went limp. Without checking if he was okay, I got up and into my car. 15 seconds later, I was driving away as the sirens stopped near Adams's car. I slowed to the speed limit and took the next left. I had one more stop before heading home. Dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, I stood by an empty gravel pit. I was exhausted, but had to finish this. I threw the bag with my clothes and leftover ammo into the water. I watched it sink before leaving. I had already thrown the rifle parts into a creek and scattered the rest around the area. If someone found one, they might find them all, but it seemed unlikely. Back home, the living room was dark. I tiptoed across the floor. "Are you all right?" Kristen asked from the couch. "I'm fine," I whispered. She sniffled and then hugged me tight. Her robe and thin pajamas were soft and warm. I wanted to hold her forever, but soon my strength began to fade. "Whitney, Kristen said she's okay too, alive and mostly unharmed." "And the person who did it?" she asked, breaking the hug. Her shiny eyes searched mine for answers. "The cops got him," I said. She hugged me tighter, but I felt myself getting weaker. "Kristen, help me to the couch." Once I sat down, she started kissing my face and hugging me. "It's going to be okay," she kept saying, as if to convince herself. I didn't reply. I just wondered when the police would come to take me in. I was too tired to care and let Kristen talk out her bottled-up feelings. "I was so scared," she finally said, sitting beside me and holding me close. "Me too," I said, feeling sleepy. She saw I was tired and gently brushed my cheek. "Go to sleep," she whispered, pulling me so my head rested in her lap. My last thoughts were about how good it felt, as Kristen ran her fingers through my hair and massaged my shoulder. So comforting, so loved. It felt like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. My breath grew shallow and Kristen kissed me softly. "Let it go," she said. She kissed me again. Darkness washed over me. I woke up on the couch, covered with a blanket and a pillow under my head. Sun Tzu, the pup, was resting on my chest, snoring lightly. "Hungry?" Kristen asked, leaning in close. She looked happy and well-rested. I started to say no, but then my stomach growled. Kristen chuckled and walked to the kitchen. Sun Tzu jumped off me and followed her, hoping for some dropped food. I sat up and stretched, trying to get rid of the stiffness. "Hey, Dad," Kyle called from the table with a mouthful of cereal and a big grin. "Hey, Mr. Patterson," Ben added. "Morning, boys," I said, yawning. "Sit," Kristen ordered, bringing me a bowl of oatmeal and a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast. "Smells great," I said, taking a seat. "Eat up," she smiled, placing the food in front of me. Then she brought me a cup of coffee, too. "You didn't have to do this," I said, starting on the toast and eggs. "But I'm glad you did." "Thanks." "You're welcome," Kristen said, sipping her coffee at the other end of the table. I ate quickly while Ben and Kyle talked about school, friends, and video games. Sun Tzu ran around the table, hoping someone would drop some food. Kristen watched with a smile. It felt like a family. A lot like what I had with Whitney and Kyle before, but with a dog and another boy. It was nice. "So what are you going to do today?" Kristen asked as I took my dirty dishes to the dishwasher. "Just hang around the house, I suppose," I said, feeling my chest tighten. I was surprised the police hadn't come to take me away yet. "I'll get some paperwork done for next week's classes." "I was thinking," Kristen started. "We want to order pizza and watch movies," Ben interrupted. I looked at him. "We," meaning me and Ben. I turned to Kristen. "Thoughts?" She shook her head. "If you have other plans or want to do something else, movies and pizza sound great to me." "What about you?" Her smile was bright. "Sounds great to me, too." "Then it's settled," I said, putting the boys' dishes into the dishwasher. "Might as well plan on a sleepover." Kristen looked excited, but held it back. "I'll take them to school," Kristen said, putting her coffee cup in the dishwasher. "You get some rest. You're going to need it." She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, then whispered in my ear. I wanted to hold her tight, but the boys ran out with their backpacks and they were gone before I could move. I was dozing on the couch when the doorbell rang. My eyes flew open. It was just after 10. I walked to the door like a man walking to his fate. "Professor Patterson?" Gaver said when I opened the door. Without a word, I stepped back and motioned him and Sergeant Adams inside. "Do you have any weapons here?" Gaver asked once inside. I nodded. "Guns safe in the basement." He waved his arm. "Lead the way." I couldn't read his expression. Adams was also hard to read. I led them to the basement and turned on the lights. "Cool," Gaver said as we walked past my battle scenes towards the corner. "Whatever," Adams mumbled, bored with my hobby. I spun the lock on the gun safe and opened it, then stepped back. Adams leaned in and then said over her shoulder, "They're not here." "Good," Gaver replied, kneeling down to look at the models closely. "Crazy stuff," he said, then smiled at me. "Must have been a tough war." I nodded, still unsure what they were planning. Adams whistled softly, and I turned. She had a small wooden box in her hand, looking between it and me. She turned to the gamers who were now focused on studying Carthaginian tactics at Kinney and spoke up. "Suppose this explains it." His eyes narrowed as he turned his gaze toward her, then he walked over to us and took the box. He opened the box and looked at me. "Where's the citation?" he asked. I frowned. Only my fellow soldiers and I knew what happened that day. His eyes told me I had to show him. With a resigned shrug, I reached into the gun safe and pulled out the folder with the citation. Without saying a word, I handed it to him. He ran his fingers over the cheap plastic folder, then opened it and read aloud. "Department of the Army, this is certified. The Secretary of Defense has awarded the Silver Star to First Lieutenant Lucas M. Patterson. The United States Army states, First Lieutenant Lucas M. Patterson showed great bravery in front of the enemy. On February 24, 1991, while serving as a platoon leader for the 3rd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, 7th Corps. First Lieutenant Patterson was part of the spearhead element invading Iraq. Just after crossing the border, the lead elements were hit by small arms fire. He continued to read to himself, then went through it again quietly. Once he finished, he handed the citation to Adams and gave me a hard stare. My eyes darted from him to Adams, who was now reading the citation. Her eyes widened as she read. "You held off almost 200 men," Adams interrupted, "for a half hour, with only 2 other guys helping, and took down at least 29 enemy soldiers, all while you had bullets and shrapnel in your legs, hips, and belly." "You some kind of Superman or Rambo?" Adams asked. "I'm a history professor," I replied. They both continued to stare at me. I said nothing more. I took the citation from Adams and tossed it back in the gun safe on top of a box of medals. Adams now looked at me with awe on her face. Gabe, on the other hand, just smiled. I realized he had probably been in the Gulf War too. He was the right age and had that soldier's bearing that never really goes away. They drill that into you during officers' candidate school. "Got any coffee?" he finally said. "Sure," I replied, and led them back upstairs. I watched them at the table while I ground the coffee beans and poured water into the coffee maker. They didn't say a word, but they exchanged glances and raised their eyebrows for more than 5 long minutes. I stood at the counter wondering when the bad news would come. Just as I reached for 3 mugs and the pot of freshly brewed coffee, I saw Gav giving Adams a look. "Well," she said. I poured us all coffee and sat at the table. "How's Whitney?" I asked. "A wreck," Gav said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Mostly dehydrated. Still in shock, too. She'll come out of it," Adams said. "A few days of rest and she'll be fine. Except for the nightmares," I muttered, more to myself than to them. "Yeah," Gav said, staring into his cup. "They don't go away, do they?" I didn't respond. "The bad guys are in custody now," Adams continued, "charged with kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment and a lot of other things that will keep them locked up forever. Dunlop is handcuffed to a bed just down the hall from Whitney," Gav added. "Looks like he fell while trying to escape and banged his head pretty bad. Concussion, but nothing permanent." I nodded, trying to hide my relief at how they were handling it. "Strange thing about serious head injuries," Adams said with a smile. "Seems they wipe out short-term memory. Worse the head trauma, the longer the memory lapse. He can't remember what he had for lunch yesterday." Gav summed up. "Weird," I agreed. "There was another guy there too," Gav said, pretending he was explaining all this to a stranger. "Really?" he echoed. "Manny Samuelson, local meth maker, dealer, and all-around scumbag du jour." "Poor Manny dead?" I asked, not really caring. Adams laughed. "Second asshole gave us here," she said. "Shot him in the butt right next to his other one. Pretty messy," Gav agreed, making a face. "And how did you two figure it out?" I asked, relaxing and taking a sip of my coffee. "Just solid police work," Gav explained. "Following up the leads," Adams added. I smiled widely. "Well done? Really? Just well done?" "Thanks," Gav chuckled. "Tell our bosses that," Adams groused. Still, Gav said, "I'd just love to know why Dunlop decided to drive out there after sundown. If he hadn't done that, we'd have never found her. Poor Sergeant Adams would have just spent all night alone in her car down the block." I shrugged. "Maybe he needed to make sure nothing was wrong," I said. Gabe raised his eyebrows. "Maybe," I continued. "He got a phone call that scared him. Maybe someone told him the cops were onto him and had tapped all his phones. Something like that." Gabe nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Wonder who did that. Pretty risky." I returned his stare, agreeing with his assessment and thankful that nothing had gone wrong. My guess would be that the longer she was missing, the more likely she was dead. Whoever did it probably wanted to start things moving before they killed her. We were silent for a moment, all of us sipping our coffee. "I wonder something, though," I said. "Oh?" Gav responded. "Why was she still alive? Why didn't they just kill her right away?" Adams answered. Dunlop remembered all of that. They were going to make her leave a message sometime next week, like Wednesday or Thursday. A message saying she was now sure the whole thing was a trap. The whole case against the lab seemed fake, and she'd left because she didn't want to be part of it anymore. Sounded a bit unbelievable to me. I said and shrugged. They were in trouble, and they knew it. He'd gotten close to Whitney a long time ago, trying to get info from her about the case. He wouldn't say how close, but we could guess. Anyway, that didn't go too well. Then, once the trial started, she was working hard from the start to crush them. They thought their best chance was a mistrial. Once the jury is picked, if the mistrial is caused by the prosecution on purpose, they can't be tried again. The whole thing disappears. Bold move, I said, and we finished our coffee in silence. Well, forget it, Adam said, pushing back from the table. Just wanted to let you know your boy's mom is okay and all. Thanks, I said, standing up with them. It's been nice, Gaver said at the door, turning and shaking my hand firmly. The pleasure has been all mine, I can promise you. He smiled, then turned and walked to his car. If you ever want to, talk or something, give me a call. Okay, Sergeant Adams said, pressing her card into my hand and holding the handshake for a moment longer than needed. Thanks. Let's go, Sergeant, Gaver called out before sliding into the driver's seat of the car in the driveway. She gave a quick smile, then walked to the car. Give me a break, okay? She had her own handcuffs on. The next Monday morning, I was called into Professor Whitman's office. Your ex-wife is doing well, I take it? I nodded. She'll be fine. She got out of the hospital yesterday. Good, good. He nodded, then looked out the window at students walking back and forth under the autumn sun. I'm going to miss it, he said. Miss what? Dean Whitman. Sorry, I wasn't just being nice. Even the president of Chadwick never called Whitman by his first name. He'd been around too long and done too much for the school to not get his respect. He turned back and looked at me with a peaceful smile. I'm retiring at the end of this semester, Luke. Sure. I'd been expecting this, but it still felt like a punch to the chest. You're doing okay, right? He nodded. I figure I've got another 5 or 6 years left, and I want to spend those years putting together all of my notes and ideas from over the years, my big work, so to speak. I stayed quiet, and after a moment, he continued. I'll still be on staff, of course, as emeritus. That'll give me a research assistant to help out. But I'm giving up my teaching duties and my dean position. But you can still... No, he said, his voice softening. It needs to be someone who teaches, a scholar and a teacher both. And that's you, Luke, if you want it, that is. I sat back. It would come with more responsibility, of course, and more pay, too. But I'd have one less class to teach to make up for the extra administrative work I'd be doing. I think you need to... You ever know something was coming but still weren't ready when it came? That's how I felt. You'll do just fine, he said, his smile calming me. I smiled, leaving his office feeling peaceful for the first time in months. My life seemed to be getting better. I believed I could be happy again. It was late October before Kristen joined me again. We had spent the months getting to know each other better, and friendship quickly grew into love over Thanksgiving weekend. She and Ben moved in with Kyle, Sun Tzu, and me. Most of December was spent Christmas shopping. We were walking down the crowded mall when a voice stopped us. Professor Heather Farley was calling. She made her way through the crowd, pulling Randy along behind her. Merry Christmas, I said, smiling. Merry Christmas, they both said at the same time, her voice full of cheer, and Randy's more plain. I introduced Kristen, and another round of holiday wishes followed. So, I said, wanting to finish my shopping, you two staying around here for the holidays? Heather smiled at me, then turned to Randy, leaned in, and kissed him. Yeah, he lives too far away for us to be together if we go home. We decided to just stay here. Randy's shy smile told me he was embarrassed at the present Santa would soon give him. Weirdly, Kristen's face looked even more loving as she smiled at his blush. Good, I said, interrupting their thoughts. Since neither of you is all that busy, I've got some more things you need to get for me. You're kidding, Randy said. Not a chance. Heather agreed. I shrugged. If you change your mind. They left before I could give them more errands. She has a crush on you, Kristen said, watching them walk away. I chuckled. Looks to me like they're in love with each other, which I'd never have guessed. By the way, Kristen nudged me. Men can be so blind sometimes. I turned, leaned in, and kissed her on the cheek. Blinded to all but you, babe. She pretended to gag with her fingers in her throat. I only laughed. All but me, Kristen said, seeing my cheeky grin. Whitney called 3 days before Christmas. We'd barely spoken since she got out of the hospital. She was quiet every time I saw her, which was usually during Kyle's visitation times. Every time she looked at me, she had a haunted look on her face. The haunted look got worse when Kristen was around. I was thinking, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What, Whit? Maybe he should be with you on Christmas Day. I'll just take him for a while on Christmas Eve and bring him back by 10 or so. Not a chance, I said. Ben's going to his dad's house and Kyle's going with you. Kristen and I are going back to bed to catch up on all the sleep we've lost. We're going to miss out on Christmas Eve. It's just that he's going to get bored spending all day and night with me, she said. Nonsense. He'll be bored here too. He'll have his new presents to play with. He'll have them at your place too. She didn't respond. What's wrong? She mumbled something and I asked her to repeat it. I guess I'm just trying to figure out a way to pay you back. For what? For everything, Luke. For taking care of Kyle. For saving me. Because I messed things up, and you were still there for all of us. Saving you, I said. Kieran Adams and Aaron came to see me in the hospital before you and Kyle got there. I knew it was you in the mask. I mean, duh, right? When I brought this up, Kieran told me the whole story. They made a couple of things clear. First, they could never have saved me on their own. Your plan made it happen. Got Dunlop to go to where I was. Second, if I ever told anyone, you'd be in real danger. Not just legal trouble, but danger from bad people. Carl, too, I reminded her. Kyle could get caught in the middle. I know, so let's not talk about it anymore, okay? But you've got to let me show you I'm sorry. And thankful, too, for everything. I was silent. Please. You want to show me you're sorry? Maybe you've learned something. Fine. Then don't be late for your visits. Don't skip them. Spend as much time with Kyle as you can. He deserves a mother, too. But Kristen is not his mother. You are. Always have been. Always will be. And when you're not there for him, he feels abandoned. So you want to show me you're sorry and appreciative and all that stuff I'm not asking you for? Fine. Don't leave me here to pick up the pieces because you've skipped another visit for any reason. From now on, Kyle needs to be first in your life, not your job. Fair enough. She paused for a moment, then whispered, Fair enough? Good, I said, calming down. Then have a Merry Christmas and don't be late. I heard her sniffle with tears. I'll be there. And Merry Christmas to you too. And Kristen and Ben. We hung up. Christmas morning was like being back in the army. Reveille consisted of Ben and Kyle jumping on our bed just after 4, all excited to go unwrap their presents from Santa. 20 minutes later, with sleep still in our eyes and mugs of coffee and hot cocoa ready, the boys tore into their presents. Kristen and I had agreed to spend the same amount on each boy, to shop for and buy all gifts together, and to make them all from Santa. No need to create jealousy, and we wanted them both to know that neither of us would play favorites. Such subtleties seemed lost, though, in the room full of opened gifts. What wasn't lost, however, was that not all presents between Kristen and me had been exchanged. Dad, Kyle said, hands on hips and eyebrows raised. When were you going to give Kristen her present? After you leave, I said. Kristen looked at me with raised eyebrows, then a smile curled her lips. Strange, she said. I've got a present for you too that only gets opened when they're gone. Really? I said. Her look told me she was serious and that I'd really, really like it. Whitney and Tyler appeared at the same time to pick up Kyle and Ben, respectively. So you're Whitney, Tyler said, shaking her hand after wishing her a Merry Christmas, the prosecutor who gave us all a big scare a while ago. She looked at the floor, then nodded. Well, I'm glad you're safe, he said, then paused, furrowed his brow and looked at her strangely. Strange coincidence. My first book was about something like that, about an ex-wife who disappears without a trace. But in that one, the husband ran off and saved her. Whitney's head shot up and met his eyes. Then her face softened and she said, I guess there just wasn't enough time for Luke to get in on the action. He laughed. Guess not. Still, I'm glad you're okay. Whitney turned to me with a soft look. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a look she hadn't given me since well before Charles Lawton Dunlop had appeared on the scene. I felt a pang in my heart for what had happened between us, but then Kristen placed her hand on my arm and the regret was replaced with calm satisfaction at where I'd ended up in life. So who goes first here? I asked Kristen once the boys had left. I will, she said. Give me 5 minutes, then come into the bedroom. The look in her eyes told me 5 minutes exactly. Not a second sooner or later. Eyes on the second hand of my watch, I opened the door 5 minutes later. The sight before me took my breath away. Kristen stood there holding a box, her eyes shining with emotion. Since my second divorce, Kristen said, I haven't been totally alone. Pretty close, though, and I needed some help to get me through a lot of lonely nights. I hid this in the attic when we moved in. But the past few months have been the happiest I've had in a long time, and I decided I didn't want to hide anything from you. I opened the box and looked inside with wonder. She smiled. So I didn't really buy you a present, she continued. Not with money, anyway. Instead, I thought I'd give you something more important. My total trust, access to all of my secrets. Let you know that I'm not hiding anything from you, and that I never will. I looked into the box, then back to her. Our relationship was already special, but now my mind was rushing with the possibilities contained in the gift box before me. What am I supposed to do with these things? She asked, a bit out of breath, her eyes closing. Anything you want, I replied. Really? I leaned in and kissed her, and she kissed me back. After our workout, we fell onto the bed together, laughing. It was good time spent. I woke up to Kristen kissing me and asked, Where's my present? I opened my eyes, got up, and went to the top shelf of my closet, pulling down a small box. I turned and showed it to Kristen. When she saw it, her eyes filled with tears, and she gave a sad smile. Please tell me it's not, she said. I hesitated, then handed it to her with shaking hands. She unwrapped it and opened the box to see a ring inside. I want to get married, I said. I kept my eyes on her the whole time. You're my best friend. You've been with me through the worst times. Now I want you to be with me for the best times. She looked at me, then back at the ring. But my past, she said. I don't care. It's past. Tears started flowing. I don't want to hurt you, Luke. I've made mistakes, she said, her voice trembling. I gently turned her face towards me. Yes, you made mistakes. Big ones, and maybe mostly your fault. But that was years ago. You're not that person anymore. But what if I am? She asked. I don't think so. People learn from their mistakes. I believe that. You've learned, and you'll never do it again. But how can you know? She said. I just do. She looked at the ring, then at me, and back at the ring. I waited, my heart pounding. At first she nodded slowly, then faster, tears and laughter mixing together. I never want to lose you, she said. I hugged her tightly. And I never want to lose you.